Imagine standing at the precipice of fate, knowing that your next move could either elevate you to legendary status or cast you into oblivion. The air crackled with tension, the battlefield littered with the fallen, yet the war had only begun. This is where our journey takes a new, unforeseen turn. Rewritten and expanded story, Part 2. Jackson. Alexis cracked her neck, making Jackson quiver with anticipation. As much as I love a guessing game, look, that's the size and depth of an elite wolfman warrior. What would they be doing around here? Bard offered his opinion. Well, they, ruled the majority of the continent before we broke their spine. Likely they're getting together to regroup, repopulate, try again later. Yeah? Oh, that makes sense. Jackson nodded along. They are such nice people, too, when they aren't trying to tear your face off. You know some of them? Joe cocked his head to the side as he asked this. How do you know them, I guess, would be the better question. Helped a few of the young and elderly get out of the forest. Jackson seemed to be in earnest, and Joe certainly wasn't going to condemn someone for helping others. They seemed nice, gave me a free pass to visit all the fun times. The others exchanged a look, and Alexis asked the next question. What way were they going when you helped them out? Well, we started off going east. Then we parted ways when I continued north, Jackson explained amiably. So did they go south? Joe prodded him. Jackson scratched at his chin. Maybe. There was nothing else for it, so the party continued onward. They would need to be on guard, but what else was new at this point? They moved across the open area as night began to fall, and soon all of them were attempting to stave off yawns and grumpy attitudes. When they came to a tree, Joe called out to the others. All right, guys, I'm calling it. Let's set up here. I think we made it about 40 miles today, and it looks like anything that's out there is going to be coming after us at night. We need to get some sleep and set a watch. Why don't you just set up one of those predator territory spells? Alexis demanded, already pulling out a sleeping bag. Mainly because I haven't been able to find the time to make one. Joe got a look at that and crossed his arms defensively across his chest. Look, every single one of those rituals takes a lot of time and concentration to set up. You've seen what happens when it fails or goes wrong. Also, they're expensive to use, even if I can mitigate the cost of them. If you would like to step in and cover the mana cost, or even just the components, we'll go make some of them right now. Joe, chill. Bard put an arm around Joe's shoulders and gave him a side hug. You need some sleep, bud? Go on, I'll take first watch. Was he getting too upset? Joe didn't think so. But from the looks of the people around him, perhaps Bard had the right idea. Sorry guys. We'll talk after the inevitable attack tonight. All right. Sounds good. Sleep well. Jackson called from a hot pink, overstuffed sleeping bag that looked more like a beanbag chair than a sack. Joe decided that Jackson must have some kind of storage device and tried not to think too hard about it. He closed his eyes and was asleep in moments. It wasn't meant to last, and it seemed that the game decided to punish him for his flippant remarks. How did it punish him? With giant scorpions. The poison-using, double-pincer-wielding bugs burrowed out of the sand around them, tossing huge geysers of sand into the night air. Joe wasted no time, grabbing his staff and releasing a spray of acid from the tip. There was some damage, but nothing like Joe expected. The acid rolled off the scorpion like it was just standard water, and Joe was forced to jump back as the stingers slithered through the air at him. His stamina reserves dropped by half, but he avoided the blow. No soft flesh. I hate these things. Jackson leaped at the bug in front of him, landing on it, and riding the beast like a horse. His fists dropped like hammers, slamming into the weak points of the creature's joints. A stinger plunged at him from behind, but Jackson straight up ignored it and kept pummeling. The stinger dug into his back, and the scorpion pumped a load of poison into the monk. "Get up, yeah?" Bard joined in the fray, his axes coming down onto another of the creatures. A pincer took the blow, the bug retaliating with its other claw and tail near simultaneously. Bard blocked the tail, but the pincer wrapped around his midsection and attempted to cut him in half. Tssst! Poppy's rapier went right through his target, the armor-piercing effect of his class and weapon causing the otherwise frail creature to fall and spasm in its death throes after a single attack. Conversely, the first arrow that Alexis sent at one of the bugs skittered off and nearly damaged Bard. Seeing the issue, she switched over to a stiletto and prepared to defend herself if the creatures got too close. "Hold them off while Poppy finishes them," Joe spoke over the quiet scuffle happening on the sand, not needing to get anywhere near shouting. "How about you focus?" Bard growled at him, fending off another stinger. He had managed to smash the pincer that had gripped him, though he was heavily bruised under his armor. Jackson rolled forward and to the left of the scorpion he had been straddling and collapsed onto the ground. The bug also fell, its head entirely caved in. That's how it's done. Jackson was breathing heavily, and black lines were tracing his veins. Entomologist, baby. Down with bugs of all kinds. "Heal!" Joe sent an orb of healing water at Bard, and then rushed to Jackson's side. "Cleanse!" Black water spun in Joe's hands, flooding out of him and into the gaping wound on Jackson's back. Thick liquid started to pool out of the monk's back, causing secondary damage as it touched his skin. Corrosive poison? Now I get why my acid didn't even faze that nasty bug. Poppy lunged forward again, creating a picture-perfect thrust with one arm extended behind him. Another scorpion down. Bard and Alexis worked together to fell the one that had been trying to re-establish a grip. And all of a sudden, they were alone amongst corpses. Jackson shuddered as Joe's work continued. As the last of the poison left him, and red blood began flowing from the deep stab wound, Joe used his lay-on-hands spell and fixed the damage. "Looks like you're gonna need to get your gear fixed up, Jackson." Joe touched the ragged hole in the monk's robe. "Unless you know how to sew. No, too expensive of a skill for me to learn." Jackson sat up and smiled around at the group. "Anyone else not got experience yet? Are we still in combat?" Poppy whipped around, looking for danger. The others who had been relaxing after the event went back on high alert and grouped together. Since it was a very dark night, around 3 o'clock in the morning, only Joe was able to see what was going on outside of the light provided by the campfire. "I see nothing, but that only means that there might be something stalking us stealthily." Joe paused, feeling a tremble in the ground. "Or it might be right below us. Damadi." The group scattered as the sand split, and a tree-like tail pierced through where Poppy had been standing. From the amount of sand that was displaced, it seemed like a sandstorm was arriving. As the wind caught the dust and blew it away, a massive scorpion was revealed. Jackson took a single look and seemed to fly into a rage. "Kill it with fire!" Chapter 16. The monk was the first to charge, but the huge beast spun and sent him flying with a mere brushing of its gargantuan body. Joe readied a shadow spike, thinking about the terrible luck that had led them to fighting this monstrosity. Had it been there the entire time, or had it somehow dug to their location during the night? "No one breathe this in," Alexis called out, the only warning they got before a huge crossbow flipped up on her shoulder and she launched a bolt, that was more wine bottle than arrow. The bolt landed under the bug and released a cloud of gas that was sucked away by the steadily increasing wind. That should disorient it. It's a hallucinogen that causes accuracy to drop by half. You missed its face, Bard informed her with an odd glance. Scorpions breathe through book lungs under their body. I got it good, she assured him. He nodded and charged forward, his axes landing and being just as effective as if he had struck a rock wall. Sparks flew as his axes chipped and turned, and Bard only barely managed to avoid hurting himself. The shadow spike that Joe had cast was being channeled, and the dense armor of the bug was screeching under the strain of the continuous damage to its carapace. Still, the armor hadn't succumbed, and Joe hadn't managed to damage it yet. The stinger shot down toward Bard, slamming into the ground next to him and retracting in an instant. Bard gasped and looked at the fresh crater. It missed? You're welcome, Alexis called to him. Poppy dashed forward and sunk his rapier into an interlocking joint of the bug's leg, dealing the first damage to this massive beast since combat began. The bug squealed, turning and clacking its pincers at the duelist in an attempt to not only damage, but threaten the group. In the group, though it hadn't been tested, Poppy was currently thought to be unmatched in one-on-one combat. He flipped in the air, passing over the right pincer and dashing forward as soon as he landed. Just before he went under the scorpion, he forced himself to halt before jumping upward onto its body. The bug, thinking that the human was attempting to get under and attack its less armored underside, dropped downward to crush the foolish prey. Instead, Poppy was given a handy way to climb on top of the creature. He leaned back, aimed carefully at the space between segments, and focused all of his strength on the penetrative power of his rapier. Solidified shadows! Joe had been building an orb of shadow on the tip of the stinger and dumped mana into the shape just before it plunged downward. A massive force dropped onto Poppy, firmly pressing him to the back of the scorpion. The tail retracted a moment later, and he stood and tried to skewer the creature's head. This time, he finished his attack and drove his rapier through the plating of the scorpion and into its brain. The creature spasmed, twisted, turned, bucked, then dropped and went limp. Poppy rolled off the bug and looked around. What just happened? Experience gained, 80, 20, giant scorpion times 4. Zone alert. Members of the guild. The Wanderers have killed a local animal field boss. For the next 24 hours, all scorpions in the zone, having lost their protector, will have their armor rating reduced by 30%. The Wanderers Guild gains plus 50 fame with the city of Ardania. The area alert faded, leaving only the reward for the battle in the group's view. For being the first to vanquish the field boss, Sheila, the fat-tailed man-killer, you gain plus 2 skill points and plus 100 personal and guild fame with Ardania. Experience, 450. Title gained, Pierce the Earth. By being the first to defeat this Earth-attributed field boss, your party has gained a bonus to the type of damage used to defeat it. Effect. All damage dealt now includes 5% armor piercing. What in the actual fecal matter? Poppy looked at his rapier and shook his head. You all got the same reward as me? Do you guys even understand how difficult it is to gain armor-piercing bonuses? You need special, specific weapons and tools. Now Jackson can punch something and he deals piercing damage. What? I do. Jackson looked at his hands in awe. Nifty. All damage? Alexis looked at her bolts. How's that going to work with my poisons and such? Maybe some kind of corrosion, Joe offered. pulling up his status screen to take a look at his current bonuses, wincing as a new notification appeared. Caution. All current title slots are filled. Either replace a title, or the newest title gained will be lost. Time limit, 10 minutes. Joe looked over his titles and tried to figure out a way to keep this new title, as well as all his others. He currently had a broken title, but he wasn't sure if he wanted to use it up. Joe also had a cursed title, but that one wasn't going anywhere. He had a couple weaker titles from the start of the game, but if he could keep them, he would. The sign of a hoarder, perhaps. Combined title. Pierce the earth and broken title in darkest night. You are attempting to combine titles. You may align them as you like, but be sure that titles with ellipses are placed in the correct position. After arranging them, you have the option to make small changes, such as adding the words an, a, the, of, or something similar to create a sentence. The fewer changes that need to be made, the more potent the effect. Good luck. Title accepted. Calculating. Title condensed. New title gained. Pierce the darkest night. You stand between your people and the darkness of the world, standing steadfast and potent, where all others would flee in terror. Effect: 50% resistance to dark-aligned magic. All damage dealt now includes 5% armor piercing. The piercing bonus increases to 10% with dark-aligned spells and weapons. Well now, Joe muttered as he read over the effects. Ooh, I like that. What? I have 20 skill points to spend? He tried to remember how he had gained so many, and could only think that it was due to the leveling after the Wolfman War, as well as the skill points that he had gained in situations like this. Joe swallowed, trying to think through his options. Right now, he had enough skill points to bring a single skill up by 2 entire tiers. Did he want to do that, or should he hold off and learn as naturally as possible? Yikes. That was a tough call. Did he want to get better now? His inner greed raven wanted to wrap its wings around the horde of points and screech and peck at any attempts to use them. But was that a realistic way of doing things? Maybe it was time to bring his jump skill up to the sage ranks. Joe nodded when he came to that decision. That was likely the best use of his skill points. He allocated the points and pressed accept. Nope. Joe stared at the system message, concerned and confused. Nope. What in the... No other information. That can't be right. Let me try again. Nope. I see that you aren't stopping, so a tish more info for you. Getting into the master ranks is possible by spending skill points, but moving through them requires you to form your own insight. All masters have wildly varied techniques, even if those of a lower ranking have skills that are nearly identical. Let me condense this message. Get good. You're telling me that I'm going to have to actually jump to get my skill levels up? Joe started the sentence in a fury, but by the end, he had already accepted that this was fair. Drat. It did make sense. How could you be considered a master at something if you only followed someone else's understanding of the issue? Well, at least he still had his 20 skill points. What should he use them on? Of all his abilities, ritual magic was the most used and useful, but he was having trouble powering his rituals. In that case, add 4 points to ritual magic, 7 points to mana manipulation, and 9 points to coalescence. Joe looked over his stat sheet, feeling pleased with himself. That had actually been the perfect amount of points. He was able to bring all 3 skills up to the next rank. Skill increase, mana manipulation, student 0. Congratulations. You have met the requirements to be considered a student when controlling your mana. By reaching the student ranks, you no longer have your mana reduced. Current bonuses applied to this skill. 25% spell efficiency, maxed. Steady flow increases spell stability by 10% and reduces casting time of all mana-using skills and spells by 10%. Skill increase. Coalescence, student 0. Congratulations. Condensing your mana into a single point allows you to create a denser and more potent mana source. Current bonuses, plus 30% spell efficiency and plus 30% mana regeneration. You will be pulled into your inner self to attempt another breakthrough in 10, 9. I think you forgot that you can't increase ritual magic with skill points anymore. Sad day. Joe, Poppy called over as the group settled back down. You done talking to yourself? It's your turn to be on watch. Jen. The ritual architect turned and nodded, taking a single step toward the fire before his eyes rolled up into his head and he dropped. Poppy saw him fall and sighed. Everyone else was already in their beds, pretending they didn't see what had just happened. Poppy started walking toward Joe, quickly rolling him over and checking on him. Ugh, you did that on purpose, somehow. Joe not only couldn't hear the question, but there was also no way for him to respond. He was deep within himself at this very moment, staring at a howling hurricane, what was now an orb of power that represented all of his collected mana. All right, you. Time to condense. He exerted his willpower and forcefully worked to bring his orb of condensed mana back to the point it had been at the last time he had achieved a breakthrough. Back then, Joe had been able to condense all of his gaseous mana into a fingernail-sized orb. Obviously, his power had grown since then, even though he had since lost the ability to pull from the well of mana granted by Tatum. Come on. The mana shrank a small amount, but there wasn't enough of a change for Joe's liking. Why was this such a difficult process? It was just raw mana. He should be able to manipulate it freely. Joe tried to pull at the mana, but all that happened was a cloud of power drifting away from the core of it. The orb itself didn't change. So wild. What if I need to make my mana undergo more of a qualitative change? Joe pushed at his raging power, attempting to convince the orb to be calm, to be steady. Then he remembered that he had gained the trait of suppression resistance when he was last here and made a small realization. What he was doing right now went against who he was as a person. He wanted to be free, to be able to move and do what he wanted without the restrictions that other people wanted to put on him. What if his mana was a representation of him? Was that a thing? All right, mana. Joe stared at the swirling orb. You want to be free? I really hope this isn't a bad idea. With a thought, the contained mana was released. All the mental pressure Joe had been using to shape it, gone in an instant. The decompression of his power caused a thump like an artillery shell landing, and Joe was thrown out of his trance by the massive concussion. Chapter 17. Skill increase, coalescence, student 3. Congratulations, you have achieved a breakthrough with your ability. By understanding yourself, you have created a unique understanding with your skill. Skill rarity is increased by a rank. As a bonus, the mana regeneration provided by this skill has increased by 50%, casting time decreased by 10%. Caution. As this skill has increased in rarity, it will be comparatively difficult to grow naturally. Joe's eyes popped open, and he was treated to the nausea-inducing sight of Bard's kilt flapping right in front of his face. He started struggling to move away, and Bard simply let him flop to the ground. About time, you great walnut. I thought you were going to sleep the day away. Quickly getting to his feet and brushing the dirt off his Joe looked around. It was already well into the morning. and it was obvious that the group had been moving for quite a while. How long was I out? Hours, friend. Poppy clapped him on the arm and marched past. Joe did a double take when he saw that the stinger from Sheila was strapped to the duelist's back. But he realized that the item could potentially be converted into a formidable weapon. After all, a wasp's stinger had met the same fate to create Poppy's current rapier. Ugh. Joe glanced inside himself and saw that there was mana raging through his body, and his center was nearly empty. That was strange. Conventional wisdom demanded that mana be tightly confined within a single space. Joe had studied enough of the books that Journeyman Kell had recommended to understand at least that much. He activated his cleanse spell and hydrated himself, narrowing his eyes at his arms as he felt the change in mana accessibility. "Everything okay, Joe?" Alexis asked him as her path brought her past the team leader. "Also, you're lacking a certain sparkle that you normally have. What's up with that?" Sparkle? Joe suddenly noticed that he no longer had Exquisite Shell active, and winced at the realization that he had been unprotected for hours. He exerted his will, and mana seemed to seep out of each pore and into the air around him. "There we go. You look like someone dropped you in glitter. So pretty." Jackson clapped his hands and looked over Joe's body. "It is always the shiniest just after you cast this spell. Did you know that it tends to fade over time?" "I did not know that," Joe excitedly exclaimed. Maybe the spell wasn't so bad after all. "I did see that there was a serious difference with how fast I was able to cast the shell." "Lovely." Jackson reached out and touched Joe's cheek, then looked at his finger. Joe was pretty sure that there was disappointment on the chiropractor's face when none of the sparkly came over to him. "Pardon me, I have business with your team leader." The entire group instantly went on edge when a voice reached them. On the path, not 10 feet away, was a man dressed in garish colors. His face was hidden behind a jester mask, and he tossed aside the myriad of cloth he had bundled over him to reveal a form-fitting jester outfit. Brightly colored, slightly creepy, but overall he seemed to be non-threatening. Joe looked around. There was nowhere for the man to have been hiding. There was no cover, and the ground was flat for hundreds of feet. How was it that this man had appeared without any of them seeing him coming? Joe decided that caution was going to be his watchword here. "I'm Joe. What can I help you with?" "Hello." The colorful jester took a step toward the group, somehow instantly crossing the distance and stabbing a knife into Joe's chest. "I was sent to assassinate you. While I admire your straightforwardness, I am not a fan of the task itself." Joe infused his mana on the assassin's shadow, and the shadow spike sliced into flesh. The man looked at his knife only to see that it had stopped just before penetrating Joe's chest. "I'm very sorry to tell you this, but I do have my orders. Any chance that you could tell me why I'm being attacked?" Joe wasn't sure where his calm clarity was coming from, but for some reason he couldn't bring himself to muster fury or battle rage. "Also, why is my team not attacking you? I think that this is a situation where they should be screeching war cries, and there should be sharp metal flying at you." "Ah, I can see the confusion." The stranger was mechanically stabbing his knife at Joe's chest, and the latter could feel the shell weakening. "Sorry to have to be the one to tell you this, but we are currently inside of a trap formation. Specifically, this is the formation Apathetic Advantage. It is used to remove one's emotions, and is usually used by my organization to capture powerful beasts. They tend to be arrogant, and will refuse most bonds and such if they know about them. Truly, I'm not sure how you're able to keep functioning." "I see. That would certainly explain why I'm not sending constant streams of attacks at you as I normally would." Joe nodded at the other man, keeping his shadow spike channeled to increase the damage over time. Again, might I know the reason behind the assault? I suppose that there's no rush. The jester skittered back, moving a distance that seemed impossible with a single movement. This also removed him from the effect of the spike, and it collapsed after a moment. His daggers vanished like a popping soap bubble, and he looked at a small scrap of paper. Let me see. Joe. Oh, yes. Kill command ordered due to infringing upon the monopoly of the zoo to contain, train, or sell rare to mythical creatures. Joe stared blankly at the smiling masked jester to the point where it seemed that the formation had taken complete control. The colorful individual started to pull his knife out again, but Joe suddenly shook his head. Thank you for the information, but I fear that there is nothing I can think of that would explain the situation. Oh? Did you not sell a bunnycorn in the city? There was enough of a reaction on Joe's face that it was apparent he wanted to flee into a rage, but physically couldn't. I see. This is over such a small matter. Is there any way to resolve this peacefully? I suppose that I could offer you a capture quest to complete as compensation, the man responded after a moment of contemplation. I am authorized to do so, and it seems that you might create an issue if I attempt to slay you. Are you certain I can't simply check this off my to-do list? No, I see. In that case, let me see here. Coffee addiction, level 4. That must be an issue on long-distance missions. Here's my offer. Quest gained. Too many zoos. The zoo has offered you a chance to show that you aren't trying to compete with them. Capture a rare or higher rarity animal and gift it to the Grand Zoo of Ardania within a month. Reward. Kill order rescinded. Small non-combat pet. Coffee elemental. Failure. Kill order remains in place. A coffee elemental? I'm not even certain what that means. Joe remained fixed in place, no expression crossing his face. Allow me. The colorful man held out a hand, and after a moment, a coffee jug-sized creature appeared on his hand. In his other hand, a coffee cup appeared. The strangely liquid creature flowed into the cup until it was full, then vanished back into the man's many robes. A dash of sugar was added, and a spoon was placed in the cup. Here you are. Thank you. Any poison in here? Joe took the cup and looked down. Tiny liquid arms grasped the spoon and spun it around. A tiny voice came from the cup. Drink me. I'm delicious. That's some strong coffee, Joe commented a moment later after the entire contents of the cup had literally poured itself down his throat. It really is. No poison. That would be rude to do mid-conversation. The man nodded. The elemental has no combat utility, sadly. Do we have a deal? I couldn't possibly say no, Joe agreed easily. The man nodded, handed him a button to press when he was ready to speak with him again, and vanished. A moment later, Joe could feel his mental state evening out. What in the craptacular abyss was that? Ugh. Alexis grabbed her head. That was horrible. I felt like nothing mattered. I couldn't even be bothered when Joe was getting stabbed. The entire group seemed to agree with the assessment, though Joe was feeling something else at this moment. Caffeinated. Temporary changes. Movement speed plus 10%. Charisma -2. Intelligence +1. He smiled brilliantly at the others and started skipping along the path. Oh well. New quest, awesome rewards to be had. You ready to go? I am. Let's ask questions later. I really want to hear more about formations. Those seem useful. You knew that you nearly died there, right? Jackson called as Joe started to gain some distance from them. These things happen, Joe called back happily. In this case, I feel the threat was worthwhile. Is he okay? Poppy's question only earned a shrug and a few chuckles when Joe tripped and popped back to his feet without a comment. Chapter 18. Hey, look at that. Alexis pointed into the distance, and the group tried to see what she was pointing at. With her main characteristic being her high perception, she was able to see things that they couldn't as of yet. It took a few more seconds of walking until Poppy spoke up, and the sight came into view for Joe at that moment. Is that another group of people? Like that huge gathering of people going off to farm? Looks like it. But how in the world did they get all the way out here without getting killed off? Alexis shook her head. We're a small group of people that are frankly a little overpowered for this area, and we were still having trouble. What kind of people do they have protecting that group? Probably the kind we don't want to mess with, Bard rumbled uneasily. It's fine. We aren't doing anything to make anyone else mad. Joe shook his head and continued onward. The coffee had evened out with his high hydration, and he was still feeling pretty good. I doubt that anyone's gonna attack us. They don't want to look bad in front of all their new recruits. As they approached the mass of people who were standing in what seemed to be the middle of nowhere, shouts of alarm went up. The people shouting were still wearing the starter clothing, and the majority of them weren't even carrying a weapon of any kind. People in armor started appearing to block the small party's path. Hold. What are you doing out here? Walking? Bard rolled his eyes and continued forward. What kind of soft are you? Get off the road if you're not walking. This was obviously not the answer the man had been expecting, and it seemed that he was uncertain how to react. The crowd parted fearfully as Joe's team walked through. But when the group didn't do anything strange, the people began to calm down. Joe shook his head at the sight. Poor suckers didn't know what they were getting into. Looks like they've been having some trouble. His eyes lit up as he spied the reason this group must have chosen to stop and wait here. A shrine. Nice. Here we go. Ardenia, you guys ready to take an actual shower instead of a cold water cleanse? Absolutely, Jackson told him with a firm nod. It is terrible when people don't have the self-awareness to realize that they are causing issue to the people around them. Showers are a must. There was a long silence, and the other members of the team decided to let the comment slide. They walked up to the shrine, getting stopped by people who were acting as guards. Who are you? What do you want here? Just trying to pop into the shrine. Joe was starting to get annoyed by this group. This was a road. What's the issue? Oh, the guy hadn't drawn a sword or anything so dramatic, but he still stood in their way. Look, we're trying to use this shrine to keep our captain alive. The deity of this shrine keeps everyone who enters from dying, but doesn't heal or remove the effects. We had to send someone to try and find an antidote for scorpion venom, and I gotta tell you, the building is pretty full right now. At least this guy was being reasonable. Joe smiled gently and started walking past the man. I don't mind helping out. Can you tell me who it is that you're trying to save? You can't just... The man's face darkened, and he reached for his weapon. Chill, Joe ordered. The word from normal society made the guard hesitate, and Joe took the chance to pop into the small shrine. There were people stacked up like logs in here, and it was obvious that there were more issues than a simple scorpion sting. What in the heck happened here? Got attacked, the frustrated guard told him, having followed Joe inside. We were able to hold off the monsters, drove them off even, but a few of us got pretty messed up. Anyone just hurt? Joe looked around, but there was no indication of who had status effects and who was simply injured. That section over there. The guard gestured at the closest pile of whining bodies. "Mass heal." Joe held out his mystic theorist's staff, and the stream of water reached out to 10 people at a time. They were mainly low-level, so the tendrils of water would break off and connect to another as the people reached full health. "If you're all healed up, please hurry out of here. I need to get to everyone." People thanked him. Many even seemed to want to kiss him. Luckily, he was involved in healing people, and the respect for doctors back on Earth transferred over to this new world quite nicely. "What's next?" The guard was staring at Joe like he was a mythical creature. "A healer?" "Pretty much, yes." Joe conceded the point without quibbling. "Who should go next?" We have a few that are unconscious, but the people that are poisoned are in pain. So them next." The guard brought Joe over to a stack of people that were sweating and breathing heavily. Looking over the group, it was obvious who was in charge and who were people that were supposed to have been protected. Joe started with the newbies. Cleansing water flowed out of his hands, and one person at a time. He started to remove the venom from their bodies. Then, the unthinkable happened. Joe contorted in pain and fell to the ground, twitching, his mind burning with confusion and blurry thinking. In a few moments, he groaned and sat up, clutching at his poor head. "I ran out of mana. You have got to be kidding me." Blood flecked over Joe as the person he had half-healed coughed, once more suffering the effects of venom rushing through his body. Joe had no choice but to wait, as his ability to cleanse was reliant upon having an abundance of mana. The deadlier the poison, or venom in this case, the longer it took to clear out the various issues caused, not to mention the venom itself. This meant more mana, which was sadly a resource that he was back to standard with. Boo. Not that he didn't have an advantage. His skills afforded him a 10% boost to clearing poisons in someone's body, and he was going to be relying on that pretty heavily today. Joe looked around at the literal stacks of people and shook his head. Drat. This was going to take quite a bit of time, and he couldn't convert the shrine while it was keeping all these people alive. Well, he could, but that would make him a terrible person. As his mana approached full, he got back to work and healed the person in front of him, following up with a healing spell that brought the person back to full health. Joe saw that his mana had dropped by a quarter and knew that if he spaced out individual healings instead of trying to fix everyone instantly, as his ingrained instinct from the army demanded, he would be able to heal the group without suffering backlash. As he cleansed the next person, he watched his mana and worked on feeling out better ways to utilize his skill. There was an interesting phenomenon at play. Some people were far more mana-intensive to cleanse, and the mana cost was adjusted accordingly. He asked the patients why, but none of them knew. No one had a special resistance to being healed, so he could only assume that a higher-leveled creature had injected them. Joe mused on this issue for quite a while, and near the end of his second hour at work, he finished with the last person. Skill increase, cleanse, student 0. Congratulations, you have reached the student ranks. You have battled the effects of poison, disease, and other detrimental effects for so long that helping others has become second nature to you. This skill begins to hum and will alert you when you use another skill that resonates with it. Well, that's awesome, Joe muttered as he finished reading over the notification. Basically, it'll let me know when I can upgrade it with a high chance of success. Yes, please. Pardon my interruption. I just wanted to personally thank you for healing my people and myself. Joe turned and saw a robed woman covered in dried blood and holding out a hand. Realizing that this must be the captain that he had originally come to heal, Joe shook the outstretched hand and smiled. It was the least I could do. You're trying to help such a massive group of people at the same time. I feel a little inadequate only being able to help them once. Joe's words caused the captain to brighten, and Joe got a notification. Reputation increase. You have reached friend status with a guild leader of Golden Greens, plus 3,500. I'm just glad you came along, the captain chuckled. I wish I had a way to repay you, but we just started this guild and pooled our money to buy huge farmland. Interesting. Joe looked at the shrine and back to the guild leader. Does your guild have any allegiance to an in-game deity? Mine could potentially help you all out quite a bit. Also, I'm Joe. Teddy. Also not that I know of, though we were thinking about finding a nature-aligned deity. Just makes sense, she told Joe with a shrug. I'm a mage, but I'm pretty bad at long-range stuff, so I thought maybe I'd go for plant growth and such. You're a rogue, and you know it. One of her guildmates rolled his eyes as he walked past. I am not, Teddy shouted back. Joe noticed a glint of light in her hand and thought that she was casting a spell. Nope, a knife. It vanished a moment later like it had never existed. Sorry about that. How do you explain all the knife wounds on the creatures you killed on the way here? The man persisted, ignoring the nasty glare he was getting. No joke, you're bad at long-range magic. You stab everything to death. Even the things that poisoned you were all stabbed to death. No signs of magic. All right, you can go now. But Teddy glared at the man until he complied. Joe tried not to laugh. This was way too familiar to him. Give me a moment, will you? Joe walked over to the shrine and started the process of capturing it. There was no noticeable effect until just before it was captured. Then the shrine vanished into motes of light all at once, and a book-style shrine formed out of darkness and water before solidifying. Joe dropped to the ground, nearly wrung out of mana. Oof, that was pretty. Teddy, could do you me a favor? Try out my deity. You'll all find hidden things easier. You might even start plowing and find that your field is full of diamonds. If you don't like the bonuses you get, you can always switch away. Teddy looked around at the new shrine, playing with a small knife that vanished into a pocket when she looked at him. I guess if they don't have a deity yet, sure. No promises that people will convert, but I'll do it and lead the charge. Nice. Joe smiled. Then his eyes took on a cunning gleam. One more second. 1 minute later, the two of them returned to the shrine, having popped back to Ardania in an instant. Teddy shook Joe's hand firmly, a wide smile on her face. Oh, I like that. Any of us can use that as long as we're a follower of Tatum? Absolutely. Chapter 19. Joe hummed happily as he walked down the path. 130 new converts to his faction. That was how he was thinking of his deity affiliation. A faction. His small team had gone back to Ardania and slept at an inn, getting a good rest and a good, if very small-portioned and expensive, meal. It appeared that rationing had taken effect, and if that wasn't enough to kick this quest into high gear, Joe didn't know what else would. A couple of more days of travel and we should be able to find whatever village might be in the forest, Joe told the others as he looked over the quest information one more time. The map is out of date, but there has to be someone living in the area still. That forest? Jackson pointed into the distance. Joe looked up and saw trees ahead, but frowned and looked at his crude map. That can't be right. The forest shouldn't start for at least another 60 miles. To be fair, whatever map you have is a couple 100 years out of date, isn't it? Poppy offered a plausible explanation. Not 60 miles of forest out of date, Joe countered with pure disbelief, slapping the paper in his hands. This is a different world, Joe, Alexis pointed out. You got to assume that there are a lot of things going on that wouldn't be happening in our world. If this is a magical forest, I'm pretty sure 60 years is plenty of time to take over a huge amount of land. Ugh, Joe shook his head. You guys are right. So yeah, we should get ready to fight at all times now. From what I read, this place is going to be really hard to navigate. If it extends this much further than it used to, especially so. The group continued walking, reaching the edge of the forest after another half hour. Alexis made odd motions with her hands, then pointed at the trees. Look at this. The tree line is an actual line, like perfectly straight. Remember that we noticed that strange biome shift when we came south of the city. Joe took a look at the trees and nodded. Yup. Odd. Do you think that the forest just took over the allotted area for forest and can't extend anymore? If so, there's a lot more to this world that we really need to figure out the rules for. They took a step into the forest, simultaneously getting a notification, more like a warning, to be honest. Caution. Your level is below the recommendation for the Forest of Chlorophyll Chaos. You may want to consider leaving and returning at a later date when you are much stronger. Level recommendation 20. Holy wombats, Poppy muttered as he read. Level 20? That could take months. No joke. Jackson shook his head and looked at his status screen. From level 15 to level 20 requires 90,000 experience. I don't think there are that many wars we can win for huge chunks of points like last time. I mean, do you guys know of another race we could shatter? Are there elves? Do you guys like elves? If not, I think that we should get as much distance as we can from the edge of the forest. Alexis cut in before Jackson could solidify his warmongering plans. Anything that would be out this far might be weak for the area, but that also means that it would still be stronger than us, as well as hungry. Joe, do you have a predator's territory ready for when we go camping tonight? I do, but... Joe hesitated. Looking at the level recommendation for the area, there's a possibility that there will be creatures here that are near the level 30 threshold of the ritual. If we draw them in, we would only know because of waking up at respawn. It's a risk I think is worth taking, Alexis told him after a moment of thought. It'll keep us safe from anything below that, and there will also be a much greater chance of running into something at the lower levels than the higher ones, at least this far from the center of the forest. She makes a good point, Bard chimed in, looking up from a small book of chants he was reading out of. Then he went right back to ignoring everything around him. Joe was somewhat jealous of the man's ability to tune out the outside world, but perhaps that was a benefit of his class, tuning out. Bard certainly sang out of tune. Was that the way to say it? No, drat, can't carry a tune in a bucket. Yes, Joe opened his mouth to tell the others his joke, then realized that the group had left him behind. He hurried to catch up and rejoin them just as they found the first enemy in the forest. His joke died on his lips as the team went totally silent. Joe tried to use his perception to inspect the creature, but received an unsatisfying response. Perception check plus knowledge check failed. Any idea what that is? Bard quietly questioned. What is? Why are we all being so quiet? Jackson was just a hair too loud and the small creature turned their way. It was flying, mottled green and brown, and screeched as it saw them. It's a forest imp, Poppy told them, his perception far higher than any but Alexis. Level 20. Imp? Like a demon. Jackson was perplexed. Why is there a demon in a forest? "Dodge," Bard bellowed, taking his own advice and diving to the side. A streak of green light left the imp and traveled the distance between them in an instant. The light missed thanks to Bard's warning and their own battle senses. But as it hit the ground, a series of roots popped out of the ground and whipped around. Not finding a target, the roots dropped below the ground once more. It didn't escape Joe's attention that the roots were bladed. That would have messed us up. He swallowed hard and turned his attention more fully to the fight that they were in. The Bard, Jackson, and Poppy were rushing at the creature, and Alexis had already sent a bolt that was dodged by the small but speedy imp. Plenty of shadows to use here. He took a long moment and shaped a double spike out of shadows, solidifying the spell just as the melee fighters got into range. The spell impacted, cutting off retreat as the imp attempted to dodge the weapons coming at it. Poppy's rapier slid through the small body. Jackson's fist landed, and Bard's axe chopped in. Joe grinned a shark smile, expecting to see the imp dropping from the well-practiced combo. It didn't. In fact, it seemed enraged more than anything. Joe let the information to his combat log seep in, frowning at what little he could see. Double Shadow Spike hits for 198 shadow damage, 272, 360 shadow damage resisted, 18 piercing damage. Yikes. His most practiced spell only dealt a third of the damage that it should have. This type of creature must have a massive protection against darkness, being a devil-type creature. Would fire be effective? He needed to expand his spell list a lot. Another green bolt left the imp, and the extreme close range ensured that Bard couldn't dodge. His entire body glowed green for an instant before roots shot out of the ground and wrapped around him, the bladed edges tearing into him and watering the ground with his blood. Alexis called out, "7 seconds between casts!" The imp didn't seem to appreciate her efforts to help, and responded to the words by slapping at Jackson with its thorny hand. Jackson wiggled out of the way in time, retaliating with a nasty jab of his own. "Adjust!" The tiny arms twisted and the imp hissed at the monk, but the new angle of its arm didn't seem to impact the combat ability of the creature in the slightest. Poppy, thinking that the imp was distracted, was hit by the root-like prehensile tail of the imp and sent rolling. The creature was obviously able to use more power than its small form. Imp lied. Using his experience against the giant scorpions as a proof of concept, Joe spun up a new strand of darkness. He wrapped shadows around the imp's wings and solidified the binding after pumping mana into it for 3 seconds. 200 mana vanished in an instant, and Joe gasped for air as a void in his body appeared. He could feel the mana in his body rushing to even out, but perhaps this was an effect of his mana no longer being centralized. A cocoon of darkness pulled the flapping wings back, and the imp toppled from the air. The others started attacking as fast as possible, especially a still bleeding Bard, whose axes seemed to be the perfect weapon to use against the root and vine-coated imp. Everyone else's weapons seemed to be imp-perfect against it. Grrr. Not in a battle. Joe sent a healing spell into the scald, and the filthy wounds closed up around Gunk from the forest floor. He would need to remember to cleanse the man after this battle. The imp wasn't done. In fact, once on the ground, it sprinted around in a small area. It wasn't a fast runner over long distances, but the small zone that it claimed for itself allowed the imp to dodge nearly as well as Jackson. The darkness its wings were encased in started to tear apart, and the others redoubled their attacks. It burst away from them as it freed itself, hopping into the air and flapping furiously at Alexis with a screech. Joe caught the imp in a spray of acid, the corrosive liquid dealing reduced damage, but still enough to finish it off. Experience gained, 120, 120, Forest Imp, times 1. Pants. This might be a more difficult area than we planned for. Joe looked around for confirmation, and the others nodded at his words. My rapier hurt it, but it is like the whole body was made of roots. Poppy exclaimed as he cleaned his blade. I could put holes in that sucker, but it didn't seem to have any critical points. Couldn't find any bones. Jackson spat to the side and kicked the fallen imp. Joe sighed and offered his own complaint. Yeah, it was able to resist 2/3 of the shadow damage I could deal, and looks like it only took half damage from acid. Well, dang. Bard shook his head. Let's hope we don't run into any groups of those. We also know how the forest spread so far in the last few hundred years. Alexis pointed at the spot where the green energy had hit the ground, and the others looked over to see a small sapling that hadn't been there before. Jackson looked around at the massive forest full of tens of thousands of trees. So you're saying there are probably a lot more of those then? Chapter 20. Contrary to their concerns, forest imps seemed to be a fairly rare enemy. They weren't sure if that was due to the sheer size of the forest they were in, or if there were only a few of them in the forest in total. Either way, after fighting the powerful imp and winning, they continued on and found creatures more in tune with the forest theme. Back, 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 Poppy shouted as he rolled under the bough of an enraged tree. The forest was alive, in both a figurative and literal sense. Whomp! A spray of dirt and loam was forced into the air, leaving behind a crater that had almost contained the duelist. Looks like we've got another treant, Bard grunted like a hog, twirling his axes in agitation. Still no way to take him. Nothing I can think of that is repeatable on a regular basis. Joe shuddered as eyes opened along the trunk of the tree, and a wide tongue licked vertically along a mouth that spanned the same distance. I think I could come up with a single target ritual, but I don't have the kind of resources that we would need to kill off every one of them we find. I wonder if the trees back in the trial area were treants, Jackson mused aloud. You think, nah, there's no way these have bones, right? Alexis, how about you? Poppy turned hopeful eyes on the aromatic artificer. She shook her head as well. Same issue on my end. If I made up a batch of poison to kill plants, which I could, it would require a lot to kill just one of these. I'd need a wagon full of barrels to make any kind of impression. And then what's the point? Grrr, Poppy trilled, a sound very out of character for him. I feel like there should be an easy way to take these down. They are immobile, right? Right, but it would be like pounding away at a tank. Joe motioned for them to start walking again. You hit it, deal almost no damage, it hits you back, and you get demolished. Remember that we are really out-leveled here, and we need to play it smart. A lot of things in here can take us down nearly instantly if we get surprised by them. Stay alert. Don't die. Good life advice. Jackson nodded along heartily, then was yanked forward by Poppy, just managing not to get smashed by the treants he had wandered near yet again. See? Alert. I'm about to put you in timeout, Poppy muttered as he got back to his normal position near the front of the group. As in, I'll let the next one hit you. I think that's my cue to call a halt for the evening, Joe called out as people started to grumble and get snippy at each other. Who wants to make a fire, and who wants to cook? I can set up the campsite really quick. Good call, Alexis sighed and glanced sidelong at Joe. How opposed are you to giving me a good cleanse from a distance? You know, I sometimes feel bad using a deity-granted power to help someone shower. Joe sighed as her gaze turned more pleading. Fine. I did get it up to the student ranks, so I kinda want to see what that looks like. Cleanse. Alexis staggered as water washed over from head to toe in an instant, removing all grime from her skin and equipment. Geez, Joe. Joe was also surprised, and he looked at his hand in concern. That took so much mana, and it was basically a fire hose. Alexis had given him a second to make the connection and apology on his own. But he seemed distracted. Right, sorry about that. Joe shook off his confusion and explained himself. I'm just worried that if I use that spell to hydrate someone, I might end up hurting them accidentally, rupture some veins or some such. She winced as her mental image meshed with his. Oh yeah, get some practice in first. Who wants a shower? Bard lifted a hand. Protection ring fight? Ooh, grunts. Joe chuckled nervously as the soaked scald glowered at him. Sorry, thought you were volunteering. Right, ritual. You're all sure about this? When they motioned for him to continue, he pulled a metal plate out of his spatial ring and dripped a drop of blood onto it. He activated the ritual, which would now cause anything under level 30 to avoid them. All set on this end. What do you guys want to do tonight? Ooh. Jackson sat next to the tiny fire that had just been lit. Ghost stories. Wait, no, s'mores. Are marshmallows a thing here? No, stories then. I see. Watch rotation and logistical talk again. There we go. Poppy nodded at the final statement. Joe forestalled the conversation when he saw the resignation on Jackson's face. Actually, why don't we talk about things that are going on and what we want to do about them? We haven't really had much time to talk, and I know that a few of you weren't planning on being trapped in the game. I knew what I was getting into, but some of you weren't even in pods. You guys doing okay? Fantastic, Jackson enthusiastically responded, taking a moment to showcase his ability to bend around. I could never do this back on Earth, and now I have forever to do it and get even better at it. I was close to death back there, healthy and hale here. Joe grinned and looked at Poppy, who had a far different expression on his face. Resignation and regret were spelled out, and he wouldn't meet the eyes of the group. I am not doing as well. I came here to earn enough to be able to take care of my daughter, using my actual trained skills as a duelist to give us a comfortable life while only working 4 hours a day. He took a slow, steadying breath. I have been able to contact my parents, and luckily they were able to come over and get little Amelia. She was still taking a nap. The time dilation ensured that she didn't suffer for my arrogance at the very least. How many didn't get that? You know that my body wasn't even there. If I couldn't call, they would have thought I ran and just left her to the monsters roaming the world. He paused, taking a deep breath and looking up at the canopy above them. But now, the announcement to the world that they needed to come here to avoid danger is... What do I do with my girl? A toddler, unable to wield a sword or magic. How do I bring her to a new place that even I don't understand? But monsters are walking our planet, and she isn't safe there. But beyond that, have any of you seen any children from our world? Joe was startled by the sudden turn. In fact, he could not remember a single instance of seeing any child. The youngest he had seen was a late teen at the Mages College. He was leery of this new thought and what it might mean. Poppy nodded upon seeing their realization. Exactly. What happens to her when the data core is touched to her head? Does she get put in the trials? I do not wish that on my enemies. Terms and conditions. Joe softly muttered, a faded memory struggling to surface in his mind. What was that? Poppy glared at Joe. At the start of the game, there was an option to read all the terms and conditions. One of them was about children below the age of majority, in this case, 16, I think. It said that all children would be placed in a different area, and they would... I can't remember exactly, but they are taken care of, and I think that you have the option to be with them or visit them. I'm sorry, I was less interested in that clause at the time. Joe's voice trailed off, but Poppy didn't seem to mind. The duelist took a deep breath and sank into contemplative silence. Well, I'm having a grand old time, Bard cut in after a few beats of awkward silence. I didn't think I'd enjoy this place half as much as I do. Might be thanks to this lassie here. A wink was sent at Alexis, who simply rolled her eyes and nodded at him. Yes, you're lovely too. And in my mind, this is actually one of the best case scenarios for me. I was drowning in debt and failure, and I'm pretty sure that there's no way for people in that life to collect from me anymore. I can focus on making a new life here and live in the way I choose. How about you, Joe? More crowded than you planned for? A bit? Joe let a ghost of a smile play across his face. I have an interesting goal now, which is nice. I'm mostly concerned that there are going to be a lot of people that don't stick around this area when the next area opens up in a couple weeks. Why would that matter? Jackson cocked his head to the side. They would be going elsewhere to get resources and such, right? Fewer people here means fewer people to take care of. Win-win. But what about the people here that have no money, food, shelter? Joe shook his head and glanced around to see that he had their full attention. We were told that the races that we eventually found and worked with would be important. That implies that we will have large-scale, extinction-level fights. What would have happened if we became a shattered race? I think that one of the most important things to do in this area, the starting area, is to power up as much of humanity as possible, fix resource issues, create stable bases of power. I mean, look around. We're still in an area that outlevels us, and this is still the starter area. Joe leaned against the wood of a tree, shaking his head. How many people are actually going to be ready for the next area when they go there? I don't know that. But I do know I will be. Anyone with me will be as well. Why are you all looking at me like that? The faces of all the others were pale, washed out in the firelight. Alexis pointed up, her voice wavering and resigned. That's not a tree behind you, Joe. Joe looked back and up, meeting eyes with a treant that was double the size of any they had encountered thus far. Well over 100 feet tall at the crown. He rolled to his feet and managed to get off a blast of acid. A green and brown blur appeared in his vision, and the last thing that went through his mind was a massive branch. You have died. You were killed by Trent the Treant, guardian of the northmost zone of the forest of chlorophyll chaos. Calculating. You lose 3,000 experience. Chapter 21. Joe stepped out of the respawn room 8 in-game hours later, appearing at the shrine he had most recently converted. It's a half-day walk, even to get back to the forest from here. His rumination didn't last long. His team would likely appear shortly, and he wanted to see how things were going with his current quest to free Tatum. Joe pulled open the quest log and looked it over, the hope in his eyes quickly simmering away. Quest update. Paying a great debt. 8,075 out of 13,000 divine energy. Current sources of divine energy: 131 followers, 1 altar, 4 shrines, 1 temple, mid-sized. That's not great. But it isn't nothing. He sighed and sat to wait for a moment. There was a flash of white light, then another, and soon his entire team was around him. Hey guys, do you guys want to go back there right away? Or run back to the guild and train up a little, maybe get more specialized stuff? Yeah, let's take a couple days to train up. Poppy seemed much happier today, and it didn't take long to figure out why. I found that my girl will be in what amounts to a daycare, and I can go there anytime I wish. There is a second portal for me in my logout room, and it leads to an island in the sky where the kids get the best education, care, and food possible. A little paradise that gets harder for them as they grow up until they need to go out into the world at 16. She will be more ready for this world than I ever was. Her grandma chose to stay with her in that area as well. I'm really glad to hear it. Jackson went in for a hug, and for the first time, Poppy didn't dodge away from it. Me too. Poppy sighed softly. It was obvious that this had been a serious stressor for him. Joe, while we take a break, you should swing by the college and get some spells that are effective against plants. A classic fireball, maybe. Alexis nudged him into reacting, and Joe nodded right away. Will do. I'll see if I can find some other stuff for this specific area as well. Meet you all near the Pathfinder's Hall for skill training. The others agreed, flashing away using the fast travel function of the shrines. Joe prepared himself for a crowd, and in an instant appeared in Ardania. Time to go get some spells. Then he started making his way through the crowd, and was annoyed to the point of nearly lashing out within a few minutes. His exquisite shell had kept him from being crushed twice, and he kept wandering hands out of his pockets at least 3 times that he could detect. Beyond that, he didn't have the raw physicality to push his way through the press of people milling about. In an attempt to work around this situation, Joe looked up, crouched, and jumped. Joe left the ground like a bottle rocket, reaching the apex of his jump and flipping to land on the roof of a building. He caught the edge and pulled himself up the rest of the way. He laid there for a moment, gasping like a fish on land. He'd only lost about half his stamina in one go to get here. Okay, effective and fun, but need to boost constitution. After managing to get to his feet, Joe walked along the city block-length rooftop and stood at the edge. For almost anyone else, the prospect of jumping to his next target would have been rejected. He needed to cross the street. Joe backed up a few feet, getting a running start, and jumped off the edge. His trajectory looked very unrealistic, almost against the laws of physics, because he jumped in a nearly straight line. At the apex of his leap, he came down in another straight line to land on the building across the street, exactly where he had been aiming. All right, I'm convinced, Joe spoke aloud, ignoring his current position on the hot stone shingles of the roof. Gonna do some constitution and strength training. This is way too cool to not use it more often. He looked over the edge at the position he had started in. There was a man in orange monk robes that had been right in front of him when he started, and now that man was still only about halfway to Joe's current position. Looks like I'm still making good time, even with the resting in between. Now back on his feet, he marched along the roof and hopped over to the next one, a much shorter distance. Joe continued this until he got near the merchant area and the crowd started to thin. The guard presence here was much higher, and no one wanted to jostle them or get too close if they didn't need to do so. Now he was faced with another issue. How did he get down? If there were other buildings with handy ladders or roofing much closer to the ground, then this path would be more well-traveled. But he was 12 feet off the ground at the lowest point, and he needed to... Hold up. Did I jump 12 feet straight up from a standstill? Joe questioned his own feet, trying to remember if the... No, wait. The roof on that building was lower. This area's more affluent. Maybe there are a lot of people that use this skyway. Still, ground. He looked down and decided to dangle off the edge to cut down the distance by about half. With 23 points in strength, he was about a fifth stronger than average humans from Earth had been, and was able to keep himself stable. Joe took a moment to wonder what the average stats for humanity were now, then got back to moving. He let go and landed well. The damage reduced to nothing, thanks to his jumping skill. Now to the college and Wait, no. To the library. The Mage's College had given the library a large collection of useless spells. These were all sorts of spells that either were so inefficient or difficult to use that they were deemed to be trash, even if a good chunk of them would have been useful and powerful if they were used. Joe decided to go through the trash heap. It would be better for him if the college didn't know every spell he could bring to bear. Not that they had an issue currently, but it was better to be safe than sorry, with massive organizations that had nearly unlimited funds. Joe nodded to Boris as he walked through the doors, and the head librarian nodded back and got back to reading. It seemed everyone had goals they wanted to accomplish. He tromped up the stairs, getting to floor 3.5 and entering the room that had been dedicated to the college's donations. Just as the last time Joe had been here, he was surrounded by interesting titles. It really was too bad that most of these books shone a dull gray in his sight. He wanted to use all of them. Sadly, it would take hours to even get one of them to a useful state, and then he would still need to train that spell up to a point where it would be useful against the creatures he was now up against. So he needed something specific. Instant insect repellent. No need. My shield already works for that. Joe was muttering as he perused the unorganized shelves. Party decoration version 3. No thanks. What is that even? No, Vocus. Wildfire? Ooh, put you in the maybe bin. Yeesh, that's a dark book though. Gonna take a lot of effort to make it work. Root Reducer. Sure, that might actually be something else given that the title is dark. Plantomancy? Is this a primer on an entire field of magic? Joe looked at the most recent book he picked up. It was the size of a small 1-year-old child. There were so many gradations of correct and false statements that the book almost gave him a seizure when he looked at it from the side. Would this turn into a class-granting book if I corrected it? Good Lord, how long would that take? Put that in the long-term section. After a solid hour of selecting books, he narrowed his search to his top 5. Wildfire, Root Reducer, Weed Be Gone, Jack's Tree Fell, Deadfall, Dale's Shattered Earth. He looked at the strange, gimmicky names and had to wonder if the college had a requirement of making a spell or something. He had no idea why a majority of these existed in the first place. Let me think. Wildfire, I think you lose. My affinity is all about darkness and water, and you would be weaker than options I could get in that arena. Same deal with Treefell, Deadfall, and Shattered Earth. So either Root Reducer or We'd Be Gone. After reading through both, he decided that Root Reducer was his best bet. The other was used to remove dandelions at best, and it was an overtime sort of spell. Root Reducer looked like a solid answer to Ents, as it would remove a foot of roots per 5 seconds. If they needed to take the Ents down, they would be able to do so when their roots were completely shriveled and the treant fell over. Maybe not a hugely useful spell outside of the forest, but who knew? Joe decided that if this didn't look like it was going to work for him, he would come back and learn a spell from the college before they headed out. He left the library and Ardenia entirely, getting back to his guild in a short half-hour thanks to his fast travel route. Joe went to the Pathfinder's Hall right away and descended into the truly potent area of this building. The building was actually a grand ritual hall, but only a few people would ever be informed of this fact. In the deepest area was a room that allowed him to configure it to his needs on a whim. A desk was waiting for him, along with plenty of light. He had stocked the area with paper and ink, and he was glad that he had set everything up on his last visit. He got to work, writing out all the important and true areas, then looking into areas of the slim spell book that were gray, but not black. Lots of required motions went into the trash, but what really intrigued Joe was a small section of notes that detailed complaints the creator of the spell had. Apparently, the man felt that when he channeled the spell, he would feel invasive mana trying to enter him. Joe tapped his chin. Did this spell have a feedback mechanism? He hadn't seen anything in the world so far that hinted at vampirism or life-steal. Only effects like mana burn or extra damage. He was sure they existed somewhere, but there was a strong possibility that more potent spells were used and controlled by more magical races. If they ever found elves or dwarves and were able to work with them, he was certain they would have access to better abilities, and Joe wanted them. Until then, it was time to see if he could turn this spell into a potent new ability. Chapter 22. Joe stumbled out of the basement of the Grand Ritual Hall the next day, a tag lock vanishing into his codpiece just as he opened the door to the town. He felt the need for coffee, but his sleep deprivation had paid off. He had managed to create a clean spell form for the root-reducing spell, and after putting it on a scroll, he had learned the spell. That wasn't even the best part. After creating another scroll, he had successfully integrated it into a ritual. That ritual had been activated and assigned to the taglock he just put away. If they found a trait or something similar that a channeled spell wasn't enough for, hopefully the ritual would be able to handle it. He'd even gained a point in ritual magic after making it. You have learned a spell. Wither Plant, Beginner 5. Casting this spell on a plant will cause its roots to shrivel. By channeling the spell for at least 10 seconds, mana from the plant will begin to flow back into the caster. Can only be cast on plants or plant-based life forms that have roots. Cost 5n mana, where n equals skill level. Effect: reduce the length of a plant's roots by 1 inches. Mana returned by channeling 0.5 T, where T equals mana cost per second. Right now, a single cast would allow Joe to cut back roots by 1.5 inches, but by channeling, he could quickly destroy a root system. Not to mention, after 10 seconds, the mana cost would be effectively halved. He was excited to try it out. He started walking around the area, and it didn't take him too long to find some bristly weeds, the kind that looked like dandelion leaves, but instead of little yellow flowers, they had spikes. Joe knew from his experience getting these out of his lawn that they had deep roots, so they would make for a perfect test. Wither Plant, Joe demanded, channeling his mana through his staff. A corkscrew of black water fountained from his staff, sinking into the plant and vanishing. If he didn't see the mana flowing through the air and his reserves dipping, he would think that there was no effect. About 10 seconds later, the plant was showing no signs of motion or faltering, and Joe was getting suspicious. There was no mana coming back into him. That either meant that he was casting the spell wrong, or the plant had no roots any longer. He poked the plant with his staff, and the entire thing moved. Oh well, there we go. No roots. Strange that there wasn't any notice, but I suppose I can always just keep an eye on the mana return. Joe walked around and removed 4 more of the small plants, only stopping when he got a notification. Wither Plant, Beginner 6. Woo! Are you usually this fast, or are you just extra excited about this spell? That was fast. Joe looked at his hands, then around, trying to come up with an explanation for the rapid advancement. His eyes landed on the Pathfinder's hall not far from him, and his eyes lit up. Right. I gain skills at 4 times the regular speed, and the building boosts that even further. Is our guild gonna get overpowered? Enticing visions of his guild becoming a major superpower filled his thoughts, and he had to shake them off. He kept working at his skill, but over the next few hours was only able to get it up to Beginner 8. He shook his head at the thought. Only got to that after learning the spell this morning. He decided to change up his routine and went over to where the guild had set up a small training area. Excuse me, I'm looking for strength and constitution characteristic training. Do you guys have anything for that? The guard looked familiar to Joe, but he couldn't place the face to a name. He had very good posture, though, almost as though he saw a chiropractor regularly. Are you on Jackson's team? No idea what you mean. Joe stammered nervously, backing away. I'll come back. Hey, not so fast. The guard let a half-smile show on his face. I'm the only person running those courses right now, so if you want in here, you gotta come to me either way. Joe plastered a fake smile on his face. Great. Can I get your name? Jay. Come with me. Jay walked closer to a box, pointing at it with a wide grin. Hop on in, doing both at the same time. Requires 2 hours of effort at the first threshold. That where you are? Yes, but only have me going for 30 minutes. Please. Joe was going to continue, planning to explain why he wanted that, but Jay shook his head with a snort. You'll get nothing out of it, he warned, though there was a glint in his eyes. It is painful, and you gotta keep at it. 30 minutes, Joe resolutely reaffirmed. Fine by me. Strip to your skivvies. Jay pointed at the box. You stand there holding this square shield up. I pour hot coals on top and we keep slowly adding weight the entire time. What's your strength at? 23. Constitution is at 28. Joe nervously got into the man-height box wearing only his game-equipped loincloth. One side of the box was empty. He assumed so that people could dash out if the training was too much for them. Jay nodded. All good. That means we use hotter coals, but less of them. Joe picked up a scorched metal shield and got in position. Jay had grabbed a shovel and dumped the first load on Joe. Time starts now. The handles were already hot, not enough to burn him, but they were getting close. Hot ash drifted down with each shovelful that was added, as well as each time the wind blew even a little. In just a few minutes, he had painful welts popping up on his skin. If he couldn't heal himself at the end of this, he could tell that he would have already jumped out and away. Joe's perception was 53, which was almost double the raw score of Constitution, as well as being an entire threshold higher. He felt everything. Keep going, Jay called down, helping Joe. He hadn't been expecting that. It's only a little pain, and you look like someone who's getting unbalanced as a character. Only way to numb that pain again is to get expensive, otherwise impractical items, or boost your constitution. You keep running to perception, you won't be able to handle walking through grass too quickly. That took Joe right out of what he was doing and made him think about the repercussions for becoming too unbalanced. Where else was this going to play out? He knew that a higher constitution made people denser and heavier. Would they get to a point that they couldn't lift themselves if they didn't also work on their strength? If people worked on strength and constitution, but not dexterity, would they become like bodybuilders that had so much mass that they couldn't move properly? Joe shuddered as he thought about them hiring someone to wipe their butt for them because their arms couldn't bend that far. "That's time. Move away," Jay called to him, pulling Joe out of the spiral that his mind had gone down. Joe stepped out and angled the shield to let the coals fall into the box. Then he healed and cleansed himself, reading the notification that had popped up. Characteristic point training completed. +1 to strength and constitution. These stats cannot be increased further by any means other than system rewards for 24 hours game time. Now you see why I recommend staying. Jay shook his head at Joe. That was a waste for you. You only had to keep at it for another hour and a half, and you would have gotten 2 points. Thanks, Jay. I appreciate you looking out for me. Joe grinned and started putting his clothes back on. I'll keep at it. Do that, Jay called back as Joe waved over his shoulder. Joe, I meant now. See you tomorrow. Joe ignored the follow-up grumbles, choosing instead to focus on his current skill. Thanks to his spell efficiency, he could cast the spell for a total of 18 seconds if he got no mana returned, or 26 seconds at maximum mana return. That meant he could only cause a tree to lose about 46 inches, or just under 4 feet of roots. A quick search of the internet at the coffee shop, one of the only places to get internet without respawning, told him that roots can get 20 feet deep and 35 across. That was for standard, non-magical trees. He had a feeling that he would need to get this skill a lot higher. Then again, all I really need to do is reduce them far enough that the tree can't support itself, Joe mused as he cast his spell at a patch of brambles while sipping his coffee. If the tree's attacking, swinging back and forth, maybe I don't need to reduce the root to 0 to win. He kept at it, sipping his coffee and using his spell until he ran out of coffee. Then he just cast the spell until it started getting too dark to clearly see what he was aiming at. He went over to have dinner, then found a bed and crashed. When he got up, he looked at his skill gain with a cheerful expression. Wither plant, apprentice, 5. Just how much do you hate plants to have gained nearly 10 levels in this skill overnight? That's, 13 seconds of casting. Well, 16, and that makes 40 inches. Wait, did the spell get weaker? Joe looked at his mental math, and it had indeed gotten weaker. What in the... Did I make the spell wrong? Joe looked over the spell, but it was correctly made. He knew it was. I guess I need to get it to the student ranks to see what happens. At that point, if there's no change, I'll stop using the spell. Discouraged, he got up and took a few hours to tackle all of his characteristic training, starting with strength and constitution, and moving on to his standard 4-aspect training. Gaining a point in 6 characteristics was a heady feeling, and he decided he liked it. Oh, nice. Intelligence got to 75. Joe hopped up and went to find his team. They had anticipated him. No, Jess. He looked to the side, and there she was. She glanced away when their eyes met, but he could see the smirk on her face. You guys? Yep, ready to go? Alexis seemed to realize that he was caught off guard and couldn't hide a smile either. Jess told us that you were about done with your training for the day, and that you were going to want to go out again really soon. So we got ready, Jackson chimed in. Joe blew air out of his nose, a disgruntled chuckle. Let's go kill some tree people. Just give yourself a small raise, and if you say done, we're gonna have a talk. Jess's mouth closed with an audible click. Joe stared at her suspiciously until he was through the door to the Pathfinder's hall. Chapter 23. All right, shall we go over what we did wrong during the last trip? Joe looked around, getting confusion in reply. It appeared that his attempt to emulate Tiona hadn't been as successful as he had hoped it would be. Basically, I'm looking for us to discuss our weak points and how we can improve after what happened last time. I think you're going to have to take the lead on this one. Bard shook his head at Joe's insistence on talking whenever there was silence. Not going to display my faults for all of you to pick at. That's not at all what Joe scratched at his neck as he tried to explain. Fine. Look, here's what I failed at. I didn't have proper spells for what we faced, and I didn't adapt as quickly as I should have to the situation. I was negligent at night, too used to everything in the area being weaker than us, and it led to me dying. I'm trying to fix that by using a new spell, and will be far more wary. So you just want us to talk about little things like that? Jackson cocked his head to the side and grinned. That's easy. I plan to get hit less and hit other things more often. You aren't? Joe started to complain. Alexis joined in. Same here. More damage out, less coming in. Joe was sputtering, and he fumbled his words a few times before noticing that his friends were chuckling and holding back full laughter. Oh, ha ha. Make fun of the guy trying to help you improve. At this point, sniffs. We can see the forest, Joe. Poppy wiped his eyes. Needed that. Anyway, I think we all try to figure out a way to do better. Let's just go ahead and assume we are all adults, and don't need to be spoon-fed. Sound good? I like it. Let's make like those trees and, kill anything that comes too close. Bard shook his head. I feel sad the idioms are changing so much. Let's make like a tree and bark. Jackson tried, getting an eye roll from the scald. No, trying to force it is just sad. The group walked into the forest and stuttered to a stop. Joe looked around, trying to figure out why he felt so out of place. He could tell that the others were feeling the same way. Did we come in at the same place as last time? We definitely did. Alexis confirmed. At least we entered the forest at the same place. Unless this place had some drastic growth, this isn't the same area. There were trees and rocks that had fungus, moss, and all sorts of different colors and plants in the understory. It was obvious that they were in a different part of the forest than the last time they had been here. But the question was how. Alexis ventured a guess. You think that is going to be a recurring theme, that each time we enter here, we get a new location as our starting point? It makes sense, Bard rumbled, stroking his burgeoning beard. A defense mechanism for the forest. Make it so the people with no reason to be here get turned about. Make them want to leave. Make them want to leave? Jackson watched Bard in anticipation of a good reaction. Bard cupped his face in his hands. I should have just left well enough alone, huh? That may be the root of the problem, yes. Either way, we don't know if the monsters in the area are going to be the same as the last time that we entered, so keep a close eye on your surroundings. Joe cut into the conversation. They all went silent as a crash echoed through the area, though they started moving a little faster. Let's try and find some shelter. Crud. A strange, sinister sound came from in front of them as what Joe had thought was a flowering bush stood up and turned to look at them. It was some kind of animal. It was green and had all sorts of vines and leaves woven on it, like a new kind of fur. There were roses dotting the entire creature, which looked like a cross between a wolf, tiger, and compost pile. It smelled like a compost pile as well, which they noticed as the wind shifted. Joe, you have a new spell, you said? Alex quietly asked, trying not to draw too much attention. Want to show us how it works? Not gonna be too useful on this. Joe's words seemed to be the catalyst for change, and the creature lunged at them. Its acceleration was far faster than a creature the size of a car should be able to manage, and the group didn't have time to scatter. Joe reflexively dual-cast Shadow Spike, and the beast rammed into the spikes at full speed, stopping it from slamming into the humans. A deep rumble sounded, and the beast twisted off the spikes. A clear fluid poured out of the disconcertingly shallow wounds, likely this creature's blood. The melee members of the group took advantage of the six-legged creature's forcible pause, darting in and landing blows that would have ended the fight against creatures they were used to fighting. Sadly, all they managed was to enrage the creature, which reared back on its hind legs and lashed out with a front four. Jackson dodged one, only to be hit by the slightly varied angle of the next. The other two fighters took their hits, grunted as they were forced back, and charged in to retaliate. "Hits like a train," Poppy called as he slashed twice to the side, leaped back and activated a skill. Fuori misura. The distance he had created was crossed in a blur, his body darting forward without him taking a step. The move seemed to fully ignore physics. Poppy plunged his rapier into the creature's shoulder, grabbing and squeezing a ball near his rapier's pommel. He took another hit and rolled with it, using the momentum to get away. "Yo, need healing? I took 174 damage each hit." "Gah!" Joe washed a mend at him, then his teammates for good measure. He cast another at the duelist, wincing as he lost nearly a third of his maximum mana by using that spell 4 times. Luckily, his spell efficiency allowed him 55% off the mana cost, or he'd be half drained already, and combat had just started. "Did you use that poison I gave you?" Alexis called to Poppy, even as twin bolts thudded into the huge creature. She worked to reload as she got an answer. "Yeah, sorry to say I used most of it with that attack." Poppy dodged a swipe that nearly took his head off and returned with a deep stab into the creature's head. "This is more plant than beast. Looks like no brain. Gonna need to hack it to pieces." A powerful chop severed a leg and Bard grunted. "Well, hidya. Here we go again. Double speed for moves again." The melee attackers were suddenly moving at a much faster pace and easily dodged the next few attacks, while landing their own far easier. Joe cast Wither at one of the roses on the creature, and after 2 seconds, the flower fell off the beast. The creature staggered around drunkenly for a moment, then howled and redoubled its ferocious attacks at the group. Joe decided it was time to lead. Weak spot found. Take out the roses. On it. Jackson flipped over a thorn-coated paw, then jammed his finger into the center of a rose. A long spike stabbed out of his glove, and the flower started to bleed like a normal human would. Seems effective. 1-2 seconds and the flower died after being stabbed. Alexis called. "Creature seems to be moving slower. Can confirm." Poppy slashed with his rapier and 2 flower heads drifted sadly to the ground. The beast snarled and pounced at Alexis, pinning the startled ranged fighter and taking her to the ground. It tore into her, and the others mercilessly assaulted the beast as Alexis screamed in pain. Just as the beast finally died, Alexis did as well, brutally torn open, even though they had done all they could to prevent it. Experience gained. 777. 777. Rose Beast ×1. Rose Bard pushed the huge mass of rotting vegetation off Alexis and shakily reached down to touch her mangled face. "That's a nasty way to go." "I got this, Bard." Joe took a deep breath and started circulating mana. He went through the motions and pushed a palm at Alexis. As he cast Resurrection, a portal appeared above her body. Alexis stepped out of it as her corpse melted like snow on a hot day. Oh, she shook herself as she looked at the mess she had come back to. That sucked. Also, do you guys have any idea how bad you smell right now? Joe, cleanse them. I think they're coated in some kind of lure. We won't get 50 feet if they go into the forest smelling like that. It's pheromones of some kind. Ugh, stupid rose beast. I died to an angry flower. I'm glad you were able to get Clover your death, Alexis. You really rose above it. Joe grinned as he cast Cleanse on the people that had been in close proximity to the rose beast. You're so impressive. You grow, girl. I'll shoot you, Alexis warned him. Sorry, you're just my best bud. But you're right, Alexis. Let's get going. Pedal to the metal. Joe flinched as a bolt bounced off his exquisite shell. Oopsie-daisy. Peony for your thoughts? How do you have all these ready? Alexis narrowed her eyes fractionally. Did you waste time thinking up puns when we were all getting ready for this? Totally not, Joe denied, possibly too quickly. He decided to leave the forest puns alone for now as well. Shall we continue? The group started moving again, keeping an eye on the verdant and deadly area. First angry trees, now murderous shrubbery. There was no telling what would attack them next. They defeated a few small mutated foxes soon after, but in total they only gained 600 experience by the time they were forced to stop for the night. Unlike Joe, the others had standard vision at night, and it was too dangerous to continue. As Joe lay on his new bedroll, he looked over his stats to see what had changed. To his disgruntlement, his progress had slowed dramatically. Name: Joe. Tatum's chosen legend. Class: Mage. Actual: Ritu Architect. Profession: Tenured Scholar. Actual: Arcanologist. Character level: 15. Experience: 124,813. Experience to next level: 11,187. Ritu Architect level 2. Experience: 2,390. Experience to next level: 610. Hit points: 250 out of 250. Mana: 937.5 out of 937.5. Mana regen: 27.5 per second. Base: 25.01 per second. Increased by gear. Stamina: 225 out of 225. Stamina regen: 5.64 per second. Characteristic: raw score modifier. Strength: 25, 1 to 25. Dexterity: 34, 1.34. Constitution: 30, 130. Intelligence: 75, 2.25. Wisdom: 69, 2.19. Charisma: 26, 1.26. Perception: 54, 2.04. Luck: 30, 130. Karmic luck: +6. That death set me way back, he muttered almost too quietly for himself to hear. At least I only lost experience and not stats. I lost all the progress from clearing the entire salt mine. Sighs. Stats are looking good, though. Joe, I think something is coming, Bard called in a low tone. Instantly, the group grabbed their weapons and prepared themselves. A silhouette stepped out of the forest, slowly, and resolved into a huge wolfman warrior. Peace offered, conversation requested. Jackson stepped forward and snarled what sounded like a garbled threat. The others tightened their grips on weapons, knowing that this wouldn't end well. To their utter shock, the wolfman's ears perked up and his tail shifted in a soft, happy wag. Pain power man. Ha! The Obaba will be pleased. Come. You stay here. You die to the spores. Jackson convinced the others to follow, so the wolfman waited for them to break camp, and the confused humans followed after him into the darkness. Laughs. Chapter 24. The wolfman warrior stopped them after an hour of stumbling through the dark. Frankly, Joe had no idea how they had managed not to be attacked by all the things that were going bump in the night, or screeching into the night. That was more common. I bring you this far on honor of pain power, man. Sleep is safe for the night, at the least. The warrior was towering over them, even though he was badly hunched. But here I need strongest vow from each of you. Swear you will bring no harm to those where I bring you, that you not show this place to anyone, not breathe the word. We could never find our way back to here anyway. Poppy smarmily responded, obviously grumpy after the sudden shift in sleep schedules. There was no reply to his sass, so he reluctantly agreed. Fine, I won't tell anyone where your secret base is. The others also agreed to protect the secrets of the wolfmen, so he nodded and walked off again. Another half hour tromping through the lush forest, and they looked up to see the tips of a dozen arrows pointed at them from the trees. Joe grabbed the shadows around them, tossing them into the air. The group was blanketed in a thick, cloying, shadowy mist that even Joe couldn't see through. An ambush? Hold! Oh. The warrior then literally barked something at the wolfmen scouts that had lost sight of their targets and were starting to panic. The arrows came down, the warrior growling at a few who still hesitated. They swore a strong vow to do no harm. We pass. The Obaba waits. Humans, this is just perimeter guard. Joe and the others were standing in a defensive posture, even as the black mist boiled away. When everyone was calm, the group carefully followed the warrior into the camp. The foliage was at a density that didn't allow for much in the way of scouting out the area, but that was probably the intent when living in such a dangerous area. The party winced as a large square of blazing light appeared, but their eyes adjusted quickly and they realized that a door was open in front of them. Jackson skipped through, leaving both the humans and the wolfman slack-jawed as he got to the wizened old wolfman crone that was sitting near the fire and swept her up into a hug before poking her all over while snarling at her. Joe and company got ready to head to respawn, but then heard chuffing laughter from the elderly leader. Hello, friends of Jackson. I see that you have not been able to train him yet. Laughs. It's an ongoing and thankless task, Joe managed to reply. Something flicked past his ear, nicking his throat and drawing blood. Joe reacted instantly, and a shadow spike skewered the... He picked up a fresh, blood-stained origami paper crane. What just... Obaba gestured and snarled, and a robed form was slapped out of the room by an invisible power. Joe saw what looked like an armful of books go tumbling with whoever that was, then turned back to Obaba with a questioning look. She sighed and sat down. Of course, he was unable to resist. I am sorry I allowed you to be attacked by one of mine when you are here as a guest. I will make reparations for the damage caused. Joe was going to speak, but Jackson darted over and put a hand on his mouth. Don't insult a debt. Also, they make the best cured ham if you get to choose the form of repayment. Humans are so strange. Obaba shook herself. If I may be so bold, why are you here? You are too weak for this area. Your kind should barely be testing the edges of the mad forest. Is that what you call it? Interesting, Joe commented as he tried to find a proper way to phrase his next words. My people are on the verge of starvation. After the battle, millions more humans arrived. At this rate, many will die. Even more will work to strip the land of all things of use and will eat the trees if it comes down to it. I found an ancient text that listed this area as a place that elves once lived in, and it said that they had access to nearly unlimited food. We came here to find anything that might help us. The Obaba sat on her wooden chair, tapping a long claw on the arm of it. You know, I have a vested interest in ensuring that humans do not do too well. There is bad blood between us. Our king is slain, our people shattered. But I do remember a time when my own people starved. If you think we are animalistic now, I will help you. And here is why. She stood and walked over to Joe, looking him directly in the eyes as she approached. Her irises were a deep, swirling red, just as he knew that his eyes swirled with a lesser amount of blue and black, the signature of concentrated mana in a body. Our people have a rule. Only family may touch another without causing pain. In this way, we train ourselves to become hardy, to ignore the pain. Do you know what happens when someone is in pain or fears pain? Human Joe. They tend to lash out, swear to get revenge later, or collapse into a puddle. Joe replied with a fair bit of humor, trying to diffuse the tense environment. This is true. The powerful shaman nodded, so as a small act of petty revenge, I'm going to help you get what you want. I don't understand. The humans all looked at each other and offered up shrugs. Nothing leads to weakness like a fat society who do not need to struggle to attain what they need. If I give you all the food you need, I may not need to do anything when the time comes for our ascendancy. Your own people will simply move out of our way. They will move out of fear of losing what they have for free. You might think on this, swearing you won't use the ability you have, but when the first human starves to death in front of you, you'll give in. Obaba turned away and sat in her chair again. Now, this is still information that is worth much. You will personally benefit and soar to great heights among your people, so I need you to do something for us first. Obaba had returned to being a smiling old crone, and looking at her now, Joe would never think that she was the one that had made him sweat bullets moments ago. I need you to clear out a temple in the area. There is an infestation that I would rather not lose people to clear. You can always return, so it shouldn't be that much of an issue. Offering a quest? This was something that Joe could get behind. Could I bypass this as amends for whoever it was that just attacked me? Obaba returned with a chilly stare. The compensation I am offering is to not have to reach friend status with the people before I ever offer you a quest personally. Is this not enough? You make a good point. Joe swallowed and tried not to smile. Showing his teeth seemed like a bad idea right now. Let me guess. The temple is at the center of the forest, and we need to slay whatever is controlling all the imps and expanding the forest so much. No. Obaba snorted. You are barely able to survive at the edges of the forest, and even then only by attacking strays that are away from their packs. You want to go into a level 30 raid zone. That would require a much more grand reward than simple growth houses. Certainly not something either of us are ready for. Oh, we will guide you to the northmost site, which is too close to us for comfort. Obaba gestured at a door next to them. Go rest. You will need to be in the best shape possible to survive tomorrow. Can we see the greenhouses before we agree to this quest? Joe stopped her from dismissing them. I know that you would not be offering something you don't have. I just want to see what it is that we're getting out of the arrangement. Sleep now, Obaba ordered with a bite in her voice. In the morning, we will venture to the production area, and you will find what you came looking for. Joe looked at his team, who were swaying on their feet. They needed sleep, and there was plenty of time to find answers when they had clear minds. Joe reluctantly agreed, and they were shown to a set of surprisingly comfortable extra-large beds. Well, at least this is really nice. You guys think I made the right call here? He looked around, but found that his team was already asleep. An unnatural tugging pulled at him, and Joe succumbed to the embrace of Morpheus as well. Chapter 25. Awaken, humans. Joe's eyes snapped open, and he was perfectly awake. Awake like when a foghorn went off near your ear without the pain or flinching. "What did you do to us?" Poppy snarled as he launched out of bed. "How did you get around sending us to our spawn room when you knocked us out?" The wolfman that would be their guide for the remainder of the day snorted through his elongated snout and declined to answer. There was something shifty afoot, but they wouldn't be finding out from this scout. The wolfman gestured for them to come along, and the confused and somewhat salty humans followed him. Joe scratched at his side, then cleansed himself and his team. No need to remain salty when he was a walking shower. "I'll bring you, you take quest." The scout didn't seem to have the same linguistic range as the others that the group had interacted with. But after a moment, he was having a conversation with Jackson in the wolfman tongue as they walked. "What happened while we were all doing our own thing?" Joe asked the others, getting nods of understanding as they watched Jackson lash out and pound on the wolfman for 10 seconds. Then again, strangely, the wolfman stood tall and handed over a bag of something. Jackson looked inside, nodded, and the walk continued. "Jackson, what is cured ham?" Joe had no words, but luckily they arrived at their destination only a moment later. The only way that he knew they were there was the glass sparkling in the sun. The building itself was clear glass, and Joe could see that the place was stuffed with greenery. They walked into the building, and it was like going from having a stuffed nose to being able to smell everything. The scout with them started sneezing and even had to cover his snout after a short while. The air was odorant with flavor and rich aromas. Joe's stomach growled, and he wasn't alone. From what they could see, there was enough food to feed dozens of people for weeks, and this was just the entrance of the building. "It's greenhouse, many functions. You see good?" The scout waved them backward, and they were forced out of the building. To Obaba. Passing through the door again seemed to pull away all the scents that they had been marinating in only moments ago. It must be a function of the building, and Joe was itching to make a blueprint and create his own version. He had only been able to see a small area in the greenhouse, but it seemed to be massive on a scale that he was having trouble understanding. Such a huge building shouldn't be able to exist in hiding. But then again, it hadn't seemed that huge from the outside. Perhaps there were some tricks to it, like the spatial magic of the Mages' College. That was the only thing that Joe could think of. Was this another artifact building? Higher? Would he even be able to build it elsewhere, even if he had the blueprint? His thoughts were tumultuous as he walked, and he was on full autopilot mode until they arrived back to Obaba. She saw his faraway gaze and nodded. "You have questions. I have a few answers. Not too many, until you complete my task. Then you may ask about the building as much as you like." "Fair enough." Joe took a steadying breath, then looked her in the eye. "Does that building use spatial magic? What tier is it?" "Yes. It is larger than it should be. It is classified as a special, unique." Obaba showed teeth. "You wonder why the ranking is so low for such a potent building. I can see. The high cost to create it and the downsides that come with the building lower the perceived value. Not everything can be the best in the world, architect of artifacts." Joe flinched, but decided that it was foolish of him to think that the current leader of a nation wouldn't have a way to look at his titles, at the very least. "Well, that's good. I don't have the resources I'd need to make a bunch of artifacts, or better. Can you tell me more about the greenhouse?" "No, I don't think I will," came the disappointing answer. "Just know that there are downsides, large issues with the building that reduce the rarity to where it is. You'll get your food, but you're still going to need to devote yourself or others to securing the food. Let's talk about the need the people have. Please? Joe looked to his team, getting affirmative responses from them as well. They all knew how this game worked. Nothing for free, but rewards were enforced to a scary degree. There is an infestation of humans in a temple near us. Obaba waited for a reaction, and her eyes twinkled approvingly as Joe said nothing. To be fair, they are not like you and yours. They are wrong, broken. Their minds are in a different way, but they are dangerous in a way that you will simply need to learn for yourself. Telling you, well, just observe them for a short while before you decide to charge in. You'll see. Do we only have one chance at this? If we die, it could be that we never find our way back to you. Poppy stated the obvious, and Obaba's ears flattened. A hulking warrior stepped forward threateningly. Silence. You have not earned the right to speak in the Obaba's presence. Where I come from, we do not conform to a caste system. I have every right to talk to anyone I care to. Poppy's words were as pointed as his rapier. Joe alone does not speak for all of us. He is a leader by virtue of his position, but he has made it clear that he wants and values our input. Understand that our cultures differ greatly. Your mother differs greatly, the warrior snarled at him. But the Obaba made a whistling sound. The warrior reluctantly stepped back. Obaba looked at Poppy with her ears remaining flat. Swordsman, did you not just tell him to understand that our cultures differ? Perhaps you should look into your own actions before telling another to take heed of your own. Let me tell you something, swordsman. I smell youngling on you. You have a child, yes? Poppy reached for the hilt of his weapon. If you even try to threaten my family, I will hunt you all to extinction, no matter how long it takes. Obaba once more whistled down the bristling guards. As you can see, we are rather on edge here. Your attitude is not conducive to good relations. Tell me, swordsman, do you know why we have come to this terrible place? This forest full of death and gloom, the last respite for our people. Do you know what it means to become a shattered race? I think only your Jackson has seen the true danger of becoming as such. Joe had no idea what to do to calm the mounting tensions. He looked around at the group helplessly, his gaze eventually landing on Jackson. The chiropractor seemed confused and stepped forward to say as much. Hello. I do enjoy being included, but I have to admit that I have no idea what's going on. What do you mean? Jackson, you met me for the first time as someone was hunting us in a forest. Did you not wonder why I, the greatest shaman of the people, was scurrying away instead of standing to decimate the attacking humans? Obaba stared at the stressed face Jackson was pulling and tilted her head to the side. Do you remember how you found us? Of course. Jackson brightened instantly. I heard someone running away from me, so I skipped after them to see what was the matter. It was just one of your pups, so I tried to leave, but you got attacked. Correct, Jackson. The Obaba turned to Poppy with hard eyes. As you put it so threateningly, a shattered war race can go extinct. Have you seen other children out and about? No, just the protected area? It sure is hard to make a race go extinct when the children are safe, don't you think? Poppy paled as he made the connection that Obaba was drawing for him. Now you see, I was taking our future to this location, to a place so dangerous that the armies of your kingdom cannot easily find us. Forgive us that we are on edge around a group that has a vested interest in slaying or enslaving us. Perhaps you prove to us that you are a good people instead of hurling insults and threats because you were forced to get a good night's rest." Poppy hung his head in shame, nodding slightly to show that he had understood the issue. Obaba looked back to Joe. "Now, let's get back to the quest." Quest alert. The Cult of the Burning Mind. The Obaba has told you of an area that is too dangerous to leave alone. An infestation of not-right humans have taken control of a place of power in the forest of chlorophyll chaos and are expanding their influence in the area. Defeat them. Ensure they cannot challenge the Wolfmen, and you shall have your reward. Reward: plus 1,000 reputation with the people, plus 10,000 experience. Blueprint for Evergrowth Greenhouse. Failure: the place of power remains in control of the cult for 2 weeks. Minus 1,000 reputation with the people. Lose chance at gaining blueprint. Caution: minimum recommendation for this quest is level 25. Accept? Yes? No? Yikes. Joe shared the information with his team, and all of them paled as he had. This was a quest designed for people 10 levels above Joe. Not all of them were even level 15 yet, and frankly, this was outside of their range. They shook their heads, and Joe turned to Obaba to refuse the quest as politely as possible. "I will gift you a beacon that will allow you to get here consistently whenever you enter the forest." Obaba spoke before Joe could. "I will tell you right now, refusing the quest is the same as failing it in my eyes. You will not be allowed to return here peacefully." Joe bit his words off and reluctantly accepted the quest. Obaba nodded once and gestured at the door. "Show them the path, as many times as it is needed. Bring them here when they want to return. Show them the respect we would give those on a quest to join the people. Good luck, team of Joe. I know I ask too much, but this is what is needed." Chapter 26. An odd sight graced the forest that morning. 2 Wolfman scouts slowly and carefully picked their way through the forest, and a few feet behind them trailed a party of their racial enemy, humans. Now, no one was around to see this odd sight, and the scouts went out of their way to make sure that remained the case. The enemies here were far too powerful for 2 standard scouts, but they used their enhanced senses to great effect in avoiding conflict and choosing the best path forward. As the Obaba had mentioned, the place of power was nearby. After only an hour of creeping through the woods, huge gray stone walls appeared between the trees. If they had been walking at a normal pace in a straight line, it would have likely only taken 15 minutes or so to arrive. The walls themselves seemed to be pulsing with a faint light, and just as the group arrived, they found why this place was considered so dangerous. The scouts brought them to a tree, and after carefully ensuring that the tree wasn't an ent, the group was helped up to an overwatch position. "This is a cathedral." Joe's voice was almost too loud, and in an instant, a poisoned arrow was at his throat. He wasn't overly concerned, as he had maximized his exquisite shell, but he was somewhat embarrassed over his outburst and quieted down. The wait stretched. 10 minutes, 15, 30. Then the front doors swung open and a formation of people marched out. They were all humming the same tune, and it was catchy. Joe, still embarrassed over his previous outburst, stopped himself just before joining in, but noted with horror that everyone else, including the scouts, were humming along at a much lower decibel. "Guys, stop it," Joe demanded, taking their attention and getting glared at. Then they noticed that they were humming, and Joe was pretty sure they tried to stop, but they didn't. The walls of the building flashed more brightly, and a roar from the forest directly challenged the light and music show. The understory began to wave as a creature moved toward the formation of maybe 200 people, and the humming began to reach a crescendo. A rose beast burst from the leafy ferns that coated the ground, and after a moment to orient itself, it charged directly at the huge group of unarmed people. Joe wasn't sure what he was expecting, but it wasn't the rose beast tearing the group apart with ease. The level 20-ish beast hit the second ranks of the formation with a spray of blood, which came from the first ranks. Then the people piled on the rose beast, all of them still smiling and humming. Alexis nudged Joe and whispered, "Average level of those people is 5. I don't see anyone above 7. What in the abyss?" Joe looked back at the fight, the slaughter, just as the rose beast shook itself and sent a wave of thorns flying from the vines that encircled its body. Another dozen humans fell to the thorns and poison, but the wave of bodies started to cover the rose beast, punching, kicking, and biting between smiles. The 200 were reduced to 100, 50, 25, 2. Then the rose beast finally fell, the last of its roses torn away. The 2 remaining humans began to glow with golden light, hyper-leveling from the experience of killing such a powerful creature and only splitting it between 2 people. Joe had no doubt that they gained bonuses, skill levels, and all sorts of goodies for fighting bare-handed and unarmored. The 2 people stood, resumed humming, and returned to the cathedral. As much as Joe wanted to discuss what he'd just seen with his group, he knew that they were currently here to learn about the fighters and the challenges that they would need to face. The doors swung open and a few people stood waiting for the returning fighters. From what Joe could see, the open area was full of people. He had no idea how so many low-level people had gotten here, but he had a sinking suspicion that just perhaps some of them had thought they were going off to become farmers. "Intrusive scan," Joe muttered when he saw a muscle-bound, glowing figure welcoming back the survivors. He held the contact for 3 seconds before the figure became aware of his scan and slammed the doors to block the hostile, intrusive information gathering. That was fine with Joe, as the information he'd already gained was enough to make him wince. Radin W., Hierophant of the Burning Mind, highest stat intelligence, ongoing effects, Burning Mind, Unification, Manuel. Shielding, empowered by many, enemy of the forest, hypnotism, aura, amphitheater. Amplification, arcane, double damage. The list of active effects continued for another 2 lines, but they had vanished before Joe got a chance to read them when the Hierophant slammed the door. Yikes. This is going to be really hard, you guys. Listen to some of these effects that guy has. As Joe explained the names of the effects, the expressions around him turned defeated. To Joe's delight, he got a notification as soon as he stopped speaking. Skill increase, intrusive scan, novice 4. Hey, you shouldn't have been able to scan him. Just saying. He critically failed at blocking it. Big old boost because of that. Toodles. Weird message aside, Joe was happy to see some progress on the skill, even if he didn't know what would happen as it got stronger. Maybe people would be less likely to notice it happening. Bard interrupted his thoughts. You think the hypno-aura is why we were humming that garbage tune? Likely. And the way the wall is pulsing with light is probably from the effect of the amphitheater amplification. I bet the building is boosting his ability, Alexis stated after a moment. Joe, have you ever gotten bonuses from being in a temple or anything? Joe was taken off guard by the sudden shift in conversation, but couldn't think of a proper answer. You know what? I bet I would if I ever spent any time in one. Usually I'm on the go way too much to accumulate bonuses. But I know a lot of clerics tend to stay in one place. There has to be a reason. I'll try it out sometime. Right. I think we are going to need a plan of attack, Poppy spoke out to the others. They agreed and started very quietly discussing their options. 20 minutes later, they had narrowed it down to a pretty standard distraction, snatch and grab. I think that if we can take over the building, that is, convert it to Tatum, we will be able to take away the majority of the active effects that the Hierophant is getting. Joe was not entirely sure of his plan, but it was their best option right now. Plus, we would get a few of the Temple Guardian Golem things. For the life of me, I can't remember what they're called right now. Oh, Juggernauts. I have a major issue with this plan, though. There is no way that I have enough mana to convert this place on my own. A roadside shrine drains me dry right now. What if we were all joining you? Alexis asked him. No, think about it. Joe shook his head sharply. We need someone defending us, and the only way that we're able to get here is to go to the Wolfman. We can't exactly bring other people with us to do a proper raid, right? Good, Bard harumphed. Didn't relish the idea of being a battery anyway. Not what I signed up for. Wait, a battery? Joe's eyes sparkled and he opened his mouth to say more. Right then, the walls of the building flashed again and the doors began to creak open. Joe shut his mouth, but indicated that they would talk later. The humming started up, and soon the scene from before played out. 200 people walked out, a beast charged, and the two sides fought. None of the survivors from the last group are here, Alexis pointed out. Joe hadn't even thought to look for them, back to the highest level being 7. This time, combat ended very differently. All of the humans were wiped out, and the beast advanced on the building. The doors opened again, and Alexis pointed out 2 people in the crowd of about 50 that exited. There's our survivors. Still, the group was unarmed, but now the average level was 12, and the beast was weakened. A dozen humans died, but the rest shared the experience and grew stronger. Then they re-entered the building and the doors closed again. The scout with him spoke in a harsh whisper. It is time to leave. Every 2 hours they flood out of the place of power and seek anything in the area. They are thorough. They descended from the tree and made their way to the edge of the forest. Originally, they were going to go back into the Wolfman area, but the team had convinced the Wolfman that they needed access to many things that weren't available in the current area. After the slow walk to the exit, one of the scouts passed Joe a small object that fit on his wrist, like a watch. The scout spoke then, staring at Joe with hard, deadly eyes. This will bring your party to our area if you return. I do not want to let you go, but the Obaba has spoken. Do not. The other scout gripped his partner's arm and pulled him into the woods, where they vanished. Joe started walking, knowing that if they were in the same situation, well, he might not listen to someone else. He'd fight anyone that might hurt his family. It was late evening when they got to the small shrine on the side of the dirt road, but from there, a single step pulled the entire team all the way back to the Pathfinder's Hall at the low cost of the majority of their mana and stamina. As much as they all wanted to relax and come down from the constant stress of being in such a deadly area, the 2-week time limit was nagging at all of them. Joe took a moment to fully explain the rest of his thought process for the attempt they would make on the place of power. Guys, I found I'm not sure if it's an enchantment or spell. Whatever. It converts a core into a mana battery. I need someone to go out and find the highest grade core they can find. Use the guild if needed. You know what? Make Jess do that. I'll talk to her about the tasks we need completed, actually, just so that I can answer any questions right away. Joe paused, thinking about what he should say. Right, so here's the plan. Please tell me if you come up with a better idea. Joe looked around, meeting all their eyes. This is what I need each of you to do. Chapter 27. All righty, Jessimando. Joe's enthusiasm bounced harmlessly off the iron defenses of Jess's single-track focus. I have a few really important tasks for you. I need a couple cores for testing purposes, and one that is the most powerful that you can find. Use the guild for this if you can. They promised to fund our operation. Can do. Jess whisked a note into a small notebook. Joe nodded approvingly. People were starting to take note when he spoke. Great. Next, I need an update on finances, both for myself and for my party members. I don't know what they're getting paid or what I'm getting paid, and that needs to be fixed. What else? Joe snapped his fingers. Interviews. I need to hire a few people who have high mana pools. I don't care what level they are, but I can offer them pay, a class, housing, and stuff. They can keep their day jobs. I'll just need them at various times, put them on retainer. You're just going to trust that I'll pick out the right people? Jess seemed surprised. Yes, but also no. Joe decided to clarify. They'll apply with you, but after you give the initial okay, I'll do a second interview and see if we mesh. There will be a huge benefit to working with me, but there's often a lot of pain and failure. I need people that will only care about the great benefits. Most of the people I need right now are going to be part of my ritual as coven. But check around for people hoping to be clerics. I'm pretty sure I can get them that class, too. What are you going to be doing while I do this? Jess already seemed resigned to being overworked. Poor gal. Where will you be? Only place you'll be able to get to me is at the coffee shop. At all other times, I'm going to be a little hidden, Joe replied evasively. One last thing. I need a way to capture, hold, and transport a high-level captured rare beast. See if that's doable. Jess looked at him with a twitching eyebrow. Anything else? Not so much. You get the class you were after. Joe's personal question seemed to disarm her. Oh yes, it took a bit. But I'm training up some pertinent skills right now. Even found a class trainer, though he keeps pretending to be a ranger. Gonna give me a hint? Not a chance. Excellent. I'm off to achieve the improbable. Joe pointed into the air and marched off, getting a laugh at his antics. Good. No need to be unapproachable. Joe only had a few days to make his goals come to life. Every member of their party had their tasks. And frankly, Joe felt that his personal requirements were quite a lot harder. The reason he hadn't delved into the Mana Battery book thus far was that there was a lot of misinformation in it. He needed to compile the correct information, tinker with areas about why the creator of the process seemed to think this was important, and then turn the spell into a useful process. From there, well, there was plenty to do from there. This was one of the final steps needed in capturing the building. They needed a distraction, and they needed a way to take down the Hierophant. Joe knew that last chunk might be the actual difficult portion of this quest. The enemy was smart, and Joe had no real understanding of his capabilities. Joe hadn't even recognized some of those active effects. Entering the lower hidden area of the Pathfinder's Hall, Joe was fully secluded for the first time in days. It elicited a feeling of both relief and a longing for companionship. Maybe he would hire a bard to play music for him while he worked. Nah, none of the instruments here would work for making EDM or the various video game music he listened to in order to help him focus. A lute wasn't going to be able to beat silence. Joe got over to his desk and rifled through it until he found the mana battery manual. He took a deep breath and resigned himself to wasting a lot of gold on paper in the next few days. As planned, he started with compiling. He made sure that all the correct information among the various pages all went on a fresh sheet, with plenty of space for more info to be added around it. The book was thick in comparison to most spell manuals, and as the info came together, Joe realized that his initial hunch about this was correct. This was an enchantment. He wasn't sure if everything was going to translate into a usable form, but all he could do at this point was try. Surprisingly, the information that was useless was the explanation of why the enchantment worked. That had some impact on the spell diagram that was in the book, making a few of the lines go from golden to a gray coloration. They weren't black, which indicated completely false, so it was likely that the lines would work in a limited fashion. To be included in the Mages College at all, the enchantment must have worked at least once. "You know what this means?" Joe scribbled at his paper excitedly. "I bet this diagram works perfectly on a certain type and shape of core, but not on all of them. That would make it succeed in some cases and maybe work on others, but I bet they would be unstable." At that moment, Joe remembered the Archmage of the college. He had tried to use an unstable core to destroy the city when it was obvious that he was going to lose. Was this the spellbook he had used to create it? If Joe failed to enchant a core properly, would it detonate and take a chunk of his surroundings with him? In that case, it would be better to do this off-site, like a nuclear test. While he could potentially make a potent weapon, how did someone stabilize a core that was going out of control? Better not risk it. Let me see. This going here should work on trash or damaged cores, but the higher density of power and other types would make this wobbly line go haywire, leading to an explosion. Joe started picking apart that section of the diagram, poking and reshaping. If I treat this portion as an open-ended equation, I should be able to compensate for higher tier power throughput. The downside, obviously, is that there will be a loss in efficiency. I'm gonna lose some of the potential, but I don't know at this point if it is 1% or 80. Joe cracked his neck and pulled out a fresh paper. His increased intelligence score was showing its usefulness. Making spell diagrams was essentially a combination of discrete mathematics, calculus, and trigonometry. The difficulty was an order of magnitude more difficult to him than making a ritual, which was similar to using a programming language. Hard, yes, of course. But creating a spell diagram was more similar to determining the breadboard layout of a CPU, but first proving it with math so that you didn't blow up a facility. Though he was unsure what an intelligence score of 75 translated to in terms of IQ, the modifier of 2.25 told him that he was currently 2.25 times as smart as the pre-Eternium Earth average. Joe smiled as he worked down the list of variables, angles, and power flow diagrams that would have made him run screaming when he first joined the game, and made alterations that fixed some of the issues still astonishing to him. He frowned as he made a line that wobbled and glared at his hand. Oh, it seemed that his hand was shaking. Low blood sugar? Must be it. Joe checked the time and realized that he had barely moved in 14 hours. That needed to stop happening. He set down his quill with a sigh and walked to the surface. He needed food and a nap. But there had been an unexpected gain from his work. Complicated work success. Intelligence +1. Skill increase. Ritual magic. Journeyman. 8. Training the body to withstand hunger, thirst, and ignore the need for sleep and bathroom breaks is unpleasant. but your outstanding focus can pull you through. Constitution +2. That's insane. Joe looked at it again, and he had indeed gained 3 stat points just by working at this issue. He decided right there that he was going to have to reevaluate every step of this process to make sure it was done correctly. Perhaps he was still not treating this with the actual danger level it represented. You have made 3 choices within 8 hours that averted disaster. Wisdom +1. Make that 4 stat points. Joe swallowed on a dry throat, then cast Cleanse to hydrate up. Were enchantments really so deadly and difficult? He should check in with Tara to see what she was getting out of her experience. She was trying to become an enchanter, right? Joe entered the mess hall, finding that it now had a pavilion over it instead of being an open-air picnic area. There was the guild food area, as well as an entrepreneur who had opened a small restaurant. It was about the same size as a food truck and seemed to be doing well, if the number of people in line was any indication. Joe hoped they could stay in business as food shortages started to hit. He swallowed the tasteless standard fare that the guild was offering members, realizing why there were so many people uninterested in it. But it was filling and nutritious, and everything was secondary to coffee anyway. Joe looked up as Mike walked over, a gleam reflecting off his glasses. "Joe, there you are. Well, I was hoping that I might get your assistance on a few construction projects." "Hi, Mike. I was hoping to exchange contribution points for useful items. What you got?" Joe enthusiastically stood and reached out a hand for a fist bump. Mike stuttered to a stop and looked pained. We're still working on setting up a contribution shop." "Oh, no problem." Joe grinned wickedly. "Let's talk about getting a few more buildings up better and faster than anyone else could do." Sighs. "Yes, let's talk," Mike replied sourly, knowing he'd been played. "Look, I'm going to be straight with you. For some reason, the barracks you made is just, better than the ones we've been making. Better bonuses when in use hub. Higher quality sleep. Just better. I have a title. Any construction of a new structure will boost the building's overall statistics and potential boosts by 10%. Joe nodded as Mike realized the potential of such a title. Got it from setting up that beast. Mike followed Joe's thumb to see the towering egg structure of the Pathfinder's Hall. "I see." "Boo. Well, please help us out. We need a whole lot of work done. We need houses, barracks walls, storage facilities, sanitation, baths, sewage, everything. If we can make all of this with the bonuses that you provide, we'll be able to make a stable base, turn it into a town, and get the town to rank 1 a lot faster than we could otherwise." Rank 1? This was the first Joe had heard about town rankings. Mike nodded and started to explain. "We get certain bonuses as a guild for having a town under our control. While we own the land around us, we can't do too much to make use of it. Ranking up helps with that, and allows us to petition for new and better building blueprints from the kingdom's architect and carpenter guilds. No point in having a granary if we don't have grain fields, right? No point in a sewer system without points of collection like buildings or restrooms. We're stuck with latrines and such, which lowers morale over time." "I see. Listen, we can't do too much, but, how about this?" Mike took a deep breath. "I know that you don't want to run a guild, but the amount of work you've already done to help us to this point has not gone unnoticed. If you can help us get to town, level 5, foregoing other rewards, we'll give you a new position, I'm listening. At level 5, we will have the option to choose which direction our guild grows. We decided that at that point, we will upgrade our guild into a sect. This will change around the structure a lot and open up a new position. There will be 10 spots for a guild elder. You get a say in the direction the guild grows if you want it. More pay, direct sponsorship of projects from the guild, and straight up a ton of respect. You'll also be able to add or remove people from our guild, sect at that point, so long as another elder doesn't contest the choice. Interesting, Joe muttered, thinking on the decision. Better me than someone I don't trust, and this would go a long way to clearing the air from when I quit the guild. All right, Mike. Deal. I can't do this all day, every day, so make a choice about which buildings you need, and I'll try to do one a day. Deal. Chapter 28, Guild Quest Accepted, The Making of an Elder. You have agreed to forego short-term rewards in order to gain a long-term position. Help the guild by building enough buildings that the town can reach town level 5, current town level 0 out of 5. Reward, position of an elder, when the Noble Wanderers Guild becomes a sect. Failure, no reward. Joe looked over the quest again as he got out of bed. He was glad that he had made the deal, but he was still somewhat leery of agreeing to work now for a possible reward later. It was like an artist being asked to work for exposure. People die of exposure. Still, the reward was contained in a quest, so they would need to cough up the position when it was available. Otherwise, who knew what could happen, bleh. It felt like a Monday when he had a regular job. He woke up with a bunch of time-restricted tasks that he needed to get done, or lose a bunch of potential forward or upward momentum. Shuddering at the parallel he was drawing, Joe got up and got in line for coffee. He was once again greeted as Elbow, and it took a lot of effort not to drop a shadow-formed anvil on the barista's head like a cartoon character. As he was eating his meager breakfast and drinking his cooling coffee, Jess walked over to him with a handful of people trailing behind her. "Hey, Joe. Got some hopefuls for you. These guys want to create those area of effect spells you make." "Thanks, Jess." Joe gestured to the table. "Sit down all, let's talk. I want to know why you want to join up. We will talk about expectations, and then we'll go do a trial run." He finished his coffee as the others spoke and had soon narrowed what he considered to be the actual candidates to 3 participants. As far as he could tell, everyone else wanted either to unlock their mana or use his questionable fame to get ahead in the guild. Joe could understand the first, but the second was just confusing. He wasn't concerned, as people who were just trying to get ahead were going to get scared off real quick during this next part. "Let's get to it then." Beata Joe stood and the others joined him as he walked. "Listen, if you think you really want this, great. But we're going to see if you actually want it right now. We're going to build a building and we shall see if you stick around. Also, I gotta tell you, mana unlocks automatically for everyone at level 10. If you can't stand pain, you might just want to wait until then to get it. Doing it this way's effective, but, Yup. No one left, and in fact they had gained a person. Didn't bother Joe at all, but he did wonder what the new guy thought was going on. They met up with Mike and were directed to a pile of resources. Joe had stayed awake late into the morning to convert the blueprint he was given into a ritual, and it was time to make it happen. He only needed to add in a few more details. Joe cheerfully pulled out his survey grid and tinkered with it for a few moments. After a few false starts, he managed to create the grid over the area the storage building was scheduled to be built. Neat. Joe looked at the soft light that created a box over the area. Is this in the correct spot? Mike had an administrative person run over and check the boundaries, and Joe had to make some small adjustments. When the spot was approved, Joe touched the wand-like survey grid to his ritual diagram, and the positional information was automatically added. Then the laser grid shifted from a box into a translucent blue outline of what the building would look like when finished. Mike grinned at the Ritu architect, throwing his hands into the air. "Fine, I admit it. That's super cool. What is this? Some kind of illusion magic?" "Probably." Joe started collecting blood from the people who wanted to participate, giving hard looks at the ones who seemed squeamish. "Look, guys, this is the easiest part of doing what I do. You haven't had to create, troubleshoot, or designed any of this. If this is too much to ask, you can leave now with no hard feelings. You physically can't leave during the building process." None of the 8 left, so Joe shrugged and collected blood. "Mike, looks like I'll need you on this again. No idea what the mana pool is going to look like for a few people here." Mike paled and looked around wildly. No. I'm just here to make sure." "Mike, is this why a 10 keeps sending me to do this?" Mike complained as his finger was pricked and a drop of blood landed in the silver chalice. "Because he knows he'll be used as a battery if he comes. I bet it is. Next time I'm sending a proxy, too." "I'm working on solving this issue," Joe breezily told Mike as he positioned the man on the southwest balanced position. "All set. Listen up, everyone. For those of you who are here to unlock mana, this'll work. But you'll still need to learn mana-based skills or spells. Those of you looking for a class, this is what it is like every time. It isn't easier as you rank up. Think on that. For anyone who came along for fun, please do come back." Joe activated the ritual, and the ritual circle blazed to life. Energy flowed from the lines Joe had drawn on a chalkboard, encircling the group and lifting them into the air. Then those same lines reached into each person, drawing at their innate mana supply to keep the ritual running. The components needed for the ritual crumbled into dust and were sucked away by the swirling vortex of power, and the construction materials began to move. In just over a minute, the storehouse was completed and the group returned to the ground. 3 people were coated in vomit. 2 were unconscious. The other 3 were pale and sweating, staring at Joe with wide eyes as they collapsed to the ground. Joe himself had already gone to the ground, knowing before he started that he was going to be drained to the last drop a few times during the process. "And that," he groaned, "is why I need a few more people that can do this on a regular basis." He grunted. "I can't run these on my own anymore, but..." How long have you been making these?" One of the people, a watery-eyed lady, questioned him sharply. "Since I joined Eternium," Joe told her bluntly. "I've gained skills and such that make it easier to handle, at least physically. But I've died several times while either designing or activating these rituals. Why in the world would anyone take a class devoted to this sort of thing?" A man shuddered as he sat up, having recovered consciousness while they talked. "Easy," Joe pointed at the completed building. A day of designing and refining the ritual. 1 minute of total suck, 10 minutes of recovery, and a permanent building. Not all rituals make permanent things like this one does, but there are a ton of really cool things that I can make and automate. Over the next short while, people wandered away. It was expected, so Joe tried not to take it too personally. He just sat there and looked at his gain of 100 class experience, wondering if that was the standard for uncommon ranked buildings. Probably. He did hope that he'd gain more from more impressive buildings. Joe stood up and looked around, surprised to see that there were 4 people still standing with him. "Hello. Are you guys wanting to?" "I want in," the watery-eyed lady told him. The other 3 agreed, the third being the straggler they'd picked up on the way over. Joe looked at that guy and he shrugged. "I got a basic warrior mage class, but I couldn't afford to take the classes. Even with a discount, I'm still broke. This seems like a viable way to move up, and I hear that you'll be paying to do this in the future. I can take the pain of mana drain, and every other door seems to be closed to me until I make money. I'll go to an entry-level position. At least I'll have a job." "Fair enough." Joe looked at the others, hope blooming in his chest. Starting with 4 people was 4 more than he had expected to have. "Just so you all know, making progress in this class is both difficult and expensive, both in terms of time and money. I'll pay you for all the help you give me, yes, but your personal projects are on your own." There wasn't any argument from the others, so Joe simply smiled. "Excellent. Well, I am the only class trainer for the ritualist class, so come with me and we'll get started. Achievement earned. Start a coven. You have become the leader of a group of magic users, convinced them to follow you, and are the only class trainer. Nice work. Are they there because you convinced them or because there are no other options? Does it matter? Charisma, +5, 1+1 per initial coven member, +5 to skill speech. Skill increase, speech, novice 8. Explaining the downfalls truthfully and still having people follow you is the best way to use this skill. Don't follow the route of politicians in the past, and this skill will have you commanding the masses in no time. Joe felt his body shifting in minor ways. He blinked as he read over the notification. That was the largest single gain to just charisma that he had gained ever. It was also nice to see his neglected speech skill getting some love. Joe walked with the others to the Pathfinder's Hall and brought them into a secluded section. He touched the wall and connected to the various options. He opened the ritualist class to these 4 people and watched as they accepted the class. Their eyes bugged out as they went over the benefits, and they looked at Joe for confirmation of what they were seeing. Yes, there are great benefits. Don't share that with other people, because this is a class that most people aren't going to get. You 4 showed something special today. Going forward, people are going to really need to work, and work hard, to be considered for this. Consider this a hidden class, because it is. Let this be your advantage. And Joe confirmed something and looked at the others with hard eyes. Just so you know, I can remove this class at any time. I won't ever use that ability without needing to do so, but don't think I'll let you get away with doing terrible things. Now, with that said, if you'd like to come see what I'm working on, get access to a few rituals, or just see the secret of this building, come with me. I have an enchantment to work on. Chapter 29. It had been 4 long days, and Joe was still in the process of working out the kinks in the mana battery enchantment. But the quality of his work area had increased tremendously. There were other people around, and all of them had unique ideas and plans for what they wanted to get done. Joe had offered his cleaned-up copy of Rituals for Dummies as a training guide, promising to let them see his other books when they were ready. That was the first time he actually felt like a class trainer, denying higher-leveled abilities until someone was ready for them. Joe was currently staring at the workable version of the mana battery. There were still issues, but it would work. He might lose out on some of the potential power that could be stored, but he was nearly out of time. Not to mention, He needed to get this into ritual form. He completed the diagram, watching as the paper shuddered slightly. There was no mana in there, and this wasn't something someone could just read and learn like a scroll. But still, the papers struggled to contain the magical truths contained on them. A spell, or in this case, enchantment diagram, was still a rewriting of reality on a small scale. Item created, leaflet of enchanting mana battery. This leaflet contains step-by-step instructions for turning a core into a mana battery. This process has not yet been perfected, leading to a loss of potential mana. By inscribing this diagram onto a core, you will be able to store 4 potential core experience mana into the new rechargeable battery. Skill increase, spellbinding, apprentice. 2. Wrangling the universe and convincing it to stay on paper is always an impressive feat. Skill increase, words of power, written, apprentice, 0. Not all powerful words are scrolls, but they all help to make them. Congratulations, you have reached the apprentice ranks for this skill. You are less likely to set yourself on fire, not from a boost, just because you're getting better at dodging your mistakes. Skill increase, ritual magic, expert, 0. Your ability to create, maintain, and change rituals much more efficiently has reached the ranks of an expert. You are now able to create expert-ranked rituals without too much fear of them exploding. Congratulations, you have maximized the amount that you can reduce the mana and component cost. Current bonus, 75% reduction, 25% from ritual magic, plus 50% from class bonus. Hold up. Did that rank up just take away all the extra benefits of increasing my skill level? Joe was about to grumble more when information on expert-ranked rituals began appearing in his mind. He knew they were just the fundamentals of the expert ranks, but it was fair to say that these rituals were on another level. I'm freaking hilarious. This, Joe looked at the leaflet and waffled on the next step. He desperately wanted to perfect the enchantment, but he was on a dangerous time limit. After promising himself that he would eventually make it happen, he moved on to creating a ritual for this same process. The new ritualists would come in every once in a while to watch as he made careful adjustments, but they all eventually left. During a break, the man that had joined because it was his best option asked Joe what he was doing. First off, Taka, right? Great. I'm taking a spell and turning it into a ritual. Joe watched as Taka looked over Joe's hodgepodge of work with a frown. What was your class before this again? Taka Karmic. Yes, please call me Taka. I was a warrior mage cross-classer trying to create a magic gunslinger class. I like guns, and I kinda miss them here, Taka told him after a moment. That ritual looks like my old programs written in C, but, it's strange. Yep. Turns out the universe is actually cobbled together with Python. Joe and Taka chuckled at the reference, and Joe's eyes shone as he realized that his new coven member. He'd need to give them a designation soon. Anyway, Taka seemed to understand programming, which had been a hobby that Joe had considered turning into a job back on Earth. I think you're gonna like this class, Taka. Good. I get distracted pretty easy, but all this stuff is so intricate that I can just stare at it, you know. Joe got back to it, not needing to leave since he now had minions that he could send out for food and coffee. They even got quests from him when he asked for it, gaining minor amounts of experience and money that came out of his bank account. Nifty. Another day passed before Joe put the final touches on his ritual, and he looked unhappily at the final result. Ritual created. Ritual of enchanting mana battery. Expert. This ritual creates a mana battery at half the efficiency of creating the enchantment directly. In return, after activation, the ritual no longer needs mana input, becoming self-sustaining. Simply place a core into the ritual and it will be converted into potential experience seconds. Components needed for ritual activation. Joe stopped reading, rubbing at his tired eyes. It made sense, he supposed. If he could easily replace enchanters, the class would become useless. Grr. This means that a low-grade core will only give me 1,000 mana to use. Not only that, but this ritual is expert ranked. I am an expert, but this is still gonna be on the edge of what I can create. Got used to talking to yourself while working? Taka kindly asked, making Joe flinch away and reflexively cast Cleanse on the man. As Taka sputtered, Joe blinked at him and looked around. The room had everyone working in it. That is, all the new Coven members. Phew, yeesh. I think I need to boost my perception. Joe looked at a soaked Taka. Sorry about that. But it's a lot like a shower, if that helps. Right, whatever. What's the big deal about expert-ranked rituals? Taka asked as he wiped off his face. I'll show you. Joe sent his intent into the room, and the floor began to lift until there were 4 rings clearly showing. The 4th on the outer edge was only 7 feet in diameter. This is the basic setup of an expert ritual. 4 rings that turn in alternating directions. Both sides of the rings, top and bottom, need to have the proper diagram. The rings, while turning, will lift into the air and move like a gyroscope. There will be a massive input of mana required, and if I get it wrong at the start, the entire thing will explode like a thermite bomb. If it gets all the way to activation and then something goes wrong, we could wipe out the entire town. Silence swept over the area, and Joe was glad to see them all taking his words seriously. We are playing with mana concentrations that the college sees as weapons. That's before the effect we are after is in place. Celestial feces, one of the others whispered. I just don't know how I'm going to make this ritual in only a few days, Joe fretfully muttered. You control this room, right? Taka looked at Joe sidelong. Can't you make it on those rings? Yes, but again, one mistake. Boom. Joe wiggled his hands to mimic an explosion, and another of his new Coven members spoke up. Right. But why not make 2 sets of the rings and emboss the top of one and the bottom of the other in the pattern you need? Then pour molten metal or something over it and press them together. Use the room to make a mold, then take your new rings out somewhere else and activate the ritual. The watery-eyed woman really liked to talk with her hands. But right now, Joe didn't care even a little. In fact, he might have kissed her if she wasn't across the room. That's brilliant. Joe started making preparations right away, and in his mind he even had a plan for how he was gonna do it. It remained to be seen if he could, but... All right, I'm heading out. I'll be back as soon as I can. Joe ran up to the temple and teleported to Ardania. He appeared on top of someone, and even with the sudden added weight, they didn't stumble. That was how dense the press of people were. Joe looked around and realized that he was crowd surfing along with hundreds of other people. It seemed like the overpopulation issues were getting worse, far worse, instead of better. At least this way, people would live, he supposed. He felt bad doing it, but he stood up and started hopping from person to person as a method for crossing to the merchant area. By the time he got there, Joe was exhausted and getting sick of the rancid smell of unwashed bodies, sometimes literally. He had seen several corpses in the crowd, people that had died either by being crushed in the press or attacked by someone else, and it made him both ill and glad for his exquisite shell. As he got close to masterwork metals, his face became grim. It seemed that people had finally stopped caring if the area was well guarded or not. This place was stuffed as well. Joe pushed his way to the door of the shop and got in, closing the heavy wood before people started getting shoved in. "Customers only," the smith bellowed as the door slammed shut. Joe looked down and noticed blood on the floor. Fresh blood. Apparently people had been testing the area for greater elbow room. "Hey there. Remember me, please?" Joe's smile was strained, but the smith put down the huge hammer he had been readying. "I need to buy several buckets of molten metal to pour into molded stone. Is that something you can make happen?" The smith grunted and looked Joe up and down. "I hope you aren't planning to pour it on someone. Nasty way to go, that. What sort of item are you making? How resilient do you need the metal to be? Is it going to be used to channel magic at all?" "Making components for a magic spell," Joe confessed without worrying about the smith's reaction. "Big discs of metal, expert-ranked item." "Huh." The smith pulled out a booklet. "Far as I know, anything channeling lots of mana needs rare-ranked material in order to hold up at all. In bulk, liquid form. Oh, I can get you high steel at 50 gold per ingot. About 5 ingots to a bucket crucible, in case you're wondering. How much will you need?" Joe did the math for the area and thickness he needed, and was told that he would need 3 buckets at a minimum. Joe got 3 buckets and 1 ingot extra just in case, but first had the smith melt an iron ingot to liquid. Joe thrust his hips at the bucket crucible, making the smith sputter as a sensitive area almost touched the molten metal. Then the crucible vanished and Joe waited until the smith said it should be cool enough to touch. Joe then made the liquid come out of his codpiece, appearing at the tip of his fingers as a red-hot stream. "Excellent. It stays molten for at least long enough that I should be able to put it to use." Joe gave the smith 800 gold worth of banknotes, wincing as he paid the equivalent of $8,000 for 3 buckets full of metal. He really hoped this would work the way he had hypothesized. After another awkward and painful, for them, crowd-hopping experience, he was back at the Pathfinder's Hall. Following his notes, Joe created the details of the first smallest ring, ensuring that the details were correct. When translating from notes to physical object was always a crapshoot. He measured everything twice, but since it was no longer a written thing, instead of being an item, well, his skill to see a written object's correctness didn't work anymore. He directed a thin stream of high steel over the ring, and as soon as it appeared even, he used his will to press the top ring down into the bottom. He kept the ring pressed down for 15 minutes, unsure how long it would take to cool enough to remain stable. After the time he allotted for it, he had portions of the room retract. What was left was a disk of still hot high steel. Joe inspected every inch of the inlay before he was satisfied, but when he was done, all he could do was smile. "Looks like we have a new way to create permanent ritual circles." The cost was prohibitive, but if this worked as he needed it to, it would be worth every copper. Chapter 30. "Tell me again why we are going back to the salt mines." Poppy looked around at the much lower-level people coming along and raised an eyebrow. "Also, why are they coming? Who are these people?" "They're coming along to help us with the ritual that I need to complete. The one that will let me have enough raw mana that we can potentially complete that timed quest we have." Joe was in a foul mood. He had been running himself ragged to make this happen in time, and Popeye had been complaining since he joined them because he had a hangover Joe was refusing to cure for him. "Unless you want to help power the ritual instead of them." No, I'm just not sure you need a full party in a cleared area. Poppy grumbled a little more, but Joe just ignored him in favor of walking a little faster. Why the salt mines? All right, new coven members? Joe spread a smile on his face with the ease of putting warm butter on toast. That charisma boost had really helped him hide his actual emotions, which he thought was a strange function. We're almost in the testing location, and I want to let you know ahead of time that if we die, I'll make it up to you. Question. Taka raised a hand. Why the salt mines? Good question, Taka, Joe responded brightly. Poppy drew the first inch of his rapier at Joe's gleeful reply. I remember a history lesson where salt mines were used as nuclear testing facilities, and I'm hoping that if this goes wrong, I'll be able to contain everything. Also, the guild hasn't been able to start mining here, so there's little chance of someone getting hurt or accidentally stumbling onto us. The rest of the walk was completed in quiet concentration, and they reached the bottom of the salt mines within another 15 minutes. Joe pulled out the rings, placing them in order and ensuring that they were properly aligned. The higher the rank of the ritual was, the more intricate the details on each ring became. Starting positions were important as well, since the sympathetic links connected to a space, not another ring. When it was as perfect as Joe could make it, he stepped out and started getting everyone into position. Now here's the thing. Joe took a deep breath. We should have a lot more people for this. A lot more, and more highly trained and skilled. We should be able to get away with this for only this ritual, since we only need to supply mana to a certain point. Then the core being converted should begin supplying the remaining mana. If it doesn't, we're going to die for sure. But let me explain something. Novice rituals have a base cost of about 2,000 mana. A good rule of thumb is that this increases by double for each rank. Of course, that is without any additional things added, creating only one single, very specific function. That should tell you that as an expert-ranked ritual, this has a base cost of 2,000 doubled 6 times, also known as 128,000 mana. Joe's words made the others blanch, and a few even looked around for an exit. Hold on, there's more. My bonuses bring down mana cost by 85% and component cost by 75%, dropping the cost to 19,200. My bonus spell stability brings the mana cost down even further by 55%, so the final mana cost is 8,640. The group was breathing easier at this point, and Joe's lips quirked up at the rapid changes. Still, it is more than I can handle on my own, by far, but the 5 of us coven members should be able to do it and maintain a nice balanced positioning as well. Now, as far as I know, the ritual is still treated as having the original amount needed. I hope this explains why we are away from other people. Hey, I just got the skill ritual lore, Taka announced, followed by the others, including Joe's actual party members, saying the same. Neat? I had to study rituals for a week to get that. Joe motioned for everyone to get into position while he was setting out the components. He had 2 low-grade cores for testing and 1 higher grade for usage. He didn't know the actual names or rarity, as he had no way to appraise them. When everything was ready, he placed a low-grade core in the center of the ritual, nodded, and took a deep breath. Forma mutatio. A feeling like a static discharge almost made him stumble. Blue lightning arched from him to the core, then out to each of the others taking part in the ritual. If the shock hadn't locked their muscles, there would have been people out of position right away. The first ring, which had the core placed in the empty space at the center, lifted into the air. The core lifted as well, even though nothing was touching it. Then the second ring began to move, then all of them.